Hello friends, welcome to Dead Signal FM. Please, like the video, subscribe, and tell me in the comments where are you watching from tonight. Get comfortable, relax, and let's begin. I heard my own voice calling to me from the trees, but I hadn't spoken a word. At first, I thought it was a trick of the wind through the dense canopy of the Black Forest. The Germans call it Schwarzwald for a reason. Even at midday, with sunlight filtering through the leaves above, the forest floor remained in perpetual twilight. I'd been hiking for 3 hours since breaking camp that morning, and the isolation had begun to wear on me. "Hello!" I called out, my voice echoing back strangely from multiple directions. Nothing moved among the trees. No birds sang. No squirrels chattered. The forest had gone silent, as if holding its breath, waiting. I adjusted my pack and continued along the trail, consulting my map. I was deep in the heart of the Black Forest, at least 2 days' hike from the nearest village. The solitude was why I'd come. After the divorce, after losing my job, I needed to clear my head, to find some perspective in a place untouched by modern life. The old-growth forest of southern Germany seemed perfect, ancient, mysterious, far from the noise of civilization. When I heard my voice again, it came from somewhere to my left, deeper in the woods. "This way," it said. My voice, but wrong somehow. The cadence off, the tone slightly distorted, like listening to a recording of yourself and wondering how others could stand the sound of you. I froze. Sweat beaded on my forehead despite the cool air. "Hello!" I called again, turning slowly in a circle, scanning the shadows between the massive trees. "Is someone there?" Silence stretched for 30 seconds. Then a minute. Just as I convinced myself I'd imagined it, my voice returned, closer this time, from a different direction. "I'm over here. I need help." My skin crawled. It was my voice, perfectly mimicking my slight Midwestern accent, the way I slightly clip my consonants when I'm nervous. But I hadn't spoken those words. I started walking faster, sticking to the trail, occasionally checking my compass. The logical part of my brain suggested rational explanations, another hiker playing a prank, perhaps someone who'd overheard me talking to myself earlier. Or maybe some strange acoustic phenomenon unique to these woods, bouncing sound in unpredictable ways. The sun climbed higher, its light barely penetrating the thick canopy. The trees here were different from the ones back home. Darker, more brooding, with massive trunks covered in thick moss and lichen that seemed to pulse slightly when viewed from the corner of my eye. When I'd planned this solo trek through the Black Forest, the locals in Freiburg had exchanged glances when I mentioned hiking alone. An old man at the hostel had taken me aside. "The forest doesn't like solitary travelers," he'd said in halting English. "It gets confused." I'd laughed it off as superstition, the kind of folklore that keeps tourists on the beaten path and away from the true wilderness. Now those words replayed in my mind as I quickened my pace, the weight of my backpack suddenly noticeable on my shoulders. The voice came again, this time from directly behind me. "Don't run from yourself," it said, and laughed. My laugh, but hollow, as if it had learned the sound but couldn't understand the emotion behind it. I spun around. Nothing but trees and shadows. "Who's there?" I demanded, my actual voice cracking with fear. The response came instantly, from 3 different directions at once, a chorus of my own voice. "Who's there? Who's there? Who's there?" But each repetition was slightly wrong, one too deep, one with a strange lilt at the end, one that seemed to have too many syllables though the words were the same. My heart hammered against my ribs. I took out my phone, though I knew there would be no service this deep in the forest. The screen reflected my pale face back at me, eyes wide with growing panic. I tried to record what was happening, but when I played back the video, there was only the sound of my own ragged breathing. Whatever was mimicking me didn't register on the digital recording. As afternoon faded toward evening, the voices grew more numerous and more creative. They no longer simply echoed what I said. They began to speak independently. "I've been waiting for you," one whispered from the hollow of a massive oak. "You shouldn't have come alone," another murmured from somewhere overhead. "The forest remembers," a third said from directly behind me. So close I felt phantom breath on my neck. I ran, abandoning the trail, crashing through underbrush, branches whipping at my face. The multiple voices, my voice, laughed and called, always seeming to come from just ahead of me, no matter which direction I turned. I stumbled into a small clearing as the last daylight faded. My lungs burned. I couldn't run anymore. I dropped my pack and slumped against a tree trunk, taking out my flashlight with trembling hands. "You can't outrun an echo," my voice said from the darkness beyond the beam of light. "What do you want?" I shouted, swinging the flashlight in wild arcs. The response came from directly above me. "To make you whole again." I looked up. Through gaps in the canopy, I could see the first stars appearing. But they seemed wrong, too close, too bright, arranged in patterns I didn't recognize. The voices fell silent as full darkness descended. I made camp in the clearing, hands shaking so badly I could barely set up my tent. I didn't dare light a fire, though I couldn't have explained why. Something told me that light and heat would only make things worse, would draw attention I desperately wanted to avoid. Inside my tent, I left the flashlight on, its beam creating grotesque shadows on the nylon walls. I hadn't eaten since noon, but hunger had been replaced by a gnawing dread that left no room for appetite. I checked my map by the dim light. If I started at first light and moved quickly, I could reach the small village of Feldberg by tomorrow evening. I must have dozed despite my terror, because I jerked awake sometime in the deepest part of the night. The flashlight had died. The darkness inside the tent was absolute, and someone was whispering my name, not from outside the tent, from inside, right next to my ear. My voice, but with a wetness to it, as if speaking through a mouthful of saliva. The sound of it made my skin crawl. "I know why you came here," it whispered. "I know what you're running from." I fumbled for the flashlight, clicking the button frantically. Nothing happened. "You can't escape yourself," the voice continued, now from the opposite side of the tent. "The forest knows. The forest always knows." I unzipped the tent with clumsy fingers and tumbled outside. The night air was cold on my sweat-slick skin. Above, through the trees, a quarter moon provided just enough light to see the outlines of the clearing. And I wasn't alone. At the edge of the trees stood a figure. In the dim moonlight, I could make out only its silhouette, my exact height and build, standing unnaturally still. "Who are you?" I called, my voice breaking. The figure took a step forward, and moonlight fell across its face, or where its face should have been. Instead, there was only a blur, as if someone had taken an eraser to its features, leaving behind a smudged approximation of human form. "I'm you," it said in my voice. "The you that belongs here." I backed away, stumbling over my own feet. The figure matched my movements exactly, like a mirror image. "What do you want?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted the answer. "To become," it replied. More movement caught my eye. From between the trees, more figures emerged. 5, 10, a dozen. All with my build, my posture, all with those same blurred, featureless faces. They formed a circle around the clearing, around my tent, around me. "The forest gets confused," one said. "It doesn't understand separateness," said another. "It tries to reconcile," said a third. "To make one where there should be one," they all said in unison, a chorus of my own voice coming from a dozen throats. I understood then, with a clarity born of absolute terror. The Black Forest was old, far older than human memory. It had its own consciousness, its own rules, and it couldn't comprehend the concept of individuality. When a person entered its domain alone, the forest tried to make sense of them, to echo them, to recreate them in ways it understood. But echoes are imperfect. Copies degrade. And what the forest created were flawed reflections, wanting to be complete, wanting to become real by taking what I had. The figures began to move closer, their not quite right movements making my eyes hurt to watch. They glided more than walked, as if they weren't fully subject to the same physics that governed me. I ran. Not back to the trail, they blocked that direction, but deeper into the unknown parts of the forest. Behind me, I heard them give chase, moving through the underbrush with unnatural silence save for their voices. my voice, calling to each other in a language that sounded like English played backwards. Branches tore at my clothes. Unseen roots tried to trip me. The forest itself seemed to be aiding my pursuers, trying to hold me back. I stumbled down a steep embankment and found myself beside a narrow stream, its water black in the moonlight. Without thinking, I splashed across, the icy water soaking through my boots. On the other side, I paused to catch my breath and listen. Silence. Then, from the top of the embankment, a single figure appeared, the first one I'd seen, the one who had called itself the you that belongs here. It stopped at the edge of the water, cocking its head like a curious bird. "Water," it said, in a tone of disappointment. "Always water." The others gathered behind it, their blurred faces turning toward me in perfect unison. "We'll wait," one said. "You have to cross back eventually," said another. "We have time," said a third. The forest has always had time. They settled into unnaturally still positions along the embankment, watching me with their non-faces. I backed away, keeping the stream between us, and continued through the woods. The terrain grew steeper. I was climbing upward, away from the heart of the forest. My legs ached and my lungs burned, but fear drove me onward. Sometime before dawn, I emerged above the tree line onto a rocky outcropping. Below me, the vast canopy of the black forest stretched like a dark sea. In the distance, pinpricks of light marked a village. Feldberg, I hoped, or some other outpost of humanity. I collapsed onto the rocks, exhausted beyond measure. As the sky lightened with the approaching dawn, I convinced myself that what I'd experienced had been some kind of hallucination. Sleep deprivation, perhaps. Stress. Maybe even something I'd eaten. The first rays of sun crested the horizon, and I began to feel foolish for having fled my campsite, leaving behind my tent and most of my supplies. I would have to go back, to retrieve my equipment before continuing to the village. As I stood to begin the descent, movement caught my eye at the edge of the tree line below. A figure stood there, half hidden behind a massive trunk. My height, my build, face blurred like a photograph taken while the subject was moving. It raised a hand in greeting, the gesture not quite right, as if it had learned human movement from watching but not understanding. "The forest is patient," my voice called up to me, "and we are the forest now." I turned and ran along the ridge, putting as much distance as possible between myself and the tree line, searching desperately for a path down the other side, toward the distant village. The sun climbed higher, warming the rocks, making the events of the night seem increasingly absurd. But I didn't go back for my gear. By mid-afternoon, I found a hiking trail that led down toward civilization. Every few hundred yards, I would stop and look back, listening intently. Sometimes, I thought I heard my own voice calling from far behind me, but it might have been the wind. Might have been. The village, when I reached it just before sunset, wasn't Feldberg but a smaller hamlet called Skonwald. The locals stared at my torn clothes, my mud-streaked face, my wild eyes. The owner of the small inn took pity on me, offering a room despite my disheveled appearance and lack of luggage. "You came from the forest?" she asked as she showed me to my room. "Alone?" When I nodded, she crossed herself and muttered something in German I couldn't catch. "Did something happen to you there?" she asked, her eyes searching my face. "Something strange." I hesitated, then shook my head. Who would believe me? She seemed relieved. Good. Many who go alone, they come back different. Or they don't come back at all." That night, clean and fed but unable to sleep in the unfamiliar bed, I stood at the window of my room, looking out at the edge of the forest visible in the moonlight. For a moment, just a moment, I thought I saw multiple figures standing at the tree line, all with the same height and build, all looking toward the village. Toward me. In the morning, they were gone. I told myself they had never been there at all. I left Germany the next day, fabricating a story about a family emergency for the benefit of the airline representatives who helped me change my ticket. On the flight home, I kept the window shade down. I couldn't bear to look at the vast expanse of the Black Forest as we passed over it. That was 3 years ago. I never went back for my gear, my tent, my backpack full of supplies. Sometimes I wonder if they're still there, in that small clearing deep in the heart of the forest. More often, I wonder if something else is using them now. Something with my build, my posture, my voice, but not my face. Not yet. Because sometimes, usually just before dawn when the world is at its quietest, I hear my own voice calling to me from outside my apartment window, from the small stand of trees in the park across the street. We're still waiting, it says. The forest is patient, and we're learning. Last week, I saw a figure watching me from those trees. It had my height, my build, and its face, though still blurred, still not quite right, was clearer than before. More defined, more like mine. I've started looking at maps again, looking for places far from forests, places where trees don't grow, where echoes can't hide. But I know the truth now. You can't outrun an echo, especially when it's learning to be you one scattered detail at a time. And sooner or later, I'll have to sleep with the window open. His eyes were gone, but he was still alive, whispering something in a language none of us spoke. That's how it ended for Toby. I've never told anyone what really happened out there in the Mongolian steppe. How could I? The authorities would have thought I was insane. Hell, I sometimes wonder if I am. But I know what I saw, what I felt, what followed me home. It's been 3 years since that expedition, and I still wake up tasting dust and hearing that sound, that impossible buzzing that seemed to come from inside my own skull. Sometimes I think I see movement in the corner of my living room, a rippling shadow that doesn't belong. My therapist says it's PTSD. Maybe she's right. But she wasn't there when the earth opened up and showed us what had been hiding underneath for centuries. I used to be a photographer for National Geographic. Used to be. Now I live in a small apartment in Seattle and work retouching wedding photos. I don't travel anymore. I can't. It was supposed to be a straightforward assignment. Document the changing ecosystem of the eastern Mongolian steppe. Climate change was altering the grasslands, and we were there to capture it. There were 5 of us, me, the photographer, Dr. Abigail Chin, the ecologist, Batar, our Mongolian guide, Toby, the assistant, and Marcus, the journalist. We'd spent 2 weeks traveling across the steppe, setting up camp at different locations, taking samples, shooting footage. The emptiness of that landscape does something to you after a while. The horizon stretches so far it seems to curve with the earth, nothing but grass and sky for hundreds of miles. You start to feel exposed, as if something could be watching you from anywhere. It was our third to last day when Batar received a call on the satellite phone. His cousin had been in an accident back in Ulaanbaatar. He had to leave immediately. We offered to go with him, but the assignment was nearly complete, and he insisted we could manage the remaining days without him. Just stay in this area, he said, pointing to our GPS. Do not go beyond the river to the east. The locals do not camp there. When we asked why, he just shook his head. Old stories, not important, but respect the traditions, yes. We agreed, of course, and we meant it at the time. Batar left with our second vehicle, leaving us the main truck. The next morning, we continued our work. Everything was fine until early afternoon when Marcus spotted something unusual through his binoculars. There's some kind of structure out there, he said, pointing east. Beyond the river? Dr. Chen asked. Yeah, looks man-made. Stone, maybe. I remember the way the wind suddenly picked up, sending dust devils spinning across the grass. That should have been our first warning. Batar said not to go there, I reminded them. He said not to camp there, Marcus countered. We're just going to look. Besides, this might be an undocumented archaeological site. I should have argued harder. Instead, I shrugged and packed my camera gear. The structure was about 2 miles beyond the river, a shallow, muddy stream that barely deserved the name. As we approached, I felt a strange reluctance, as if my body was resisting every step. The air seemed thicker somehow, harder to breathe. The grass around the structure was different too, darker, more lush, growing in concentric circles. The structure itself was simple. A stone altar about 4 feet high, partially buried in the ground as if the earth had been slowly swallowing it. Strange symbols were carved into the weathered surface, symbols that seemed to shift when you weren't looking directly at them. "This is incredible," Dr. Chun whispered, running her hand over the carvings. "This doesn't match any known Mongolian archaeological site I've studied." "Maybe it's pre-Mongol Empire," Marcus suggested. "Xiongnu, perhaps?" Toby, who'd been unusually quiet, suddenly spoke up. "We should leave it alone." We all turned to look at him. Toby was the youngest of our group, a college student getting field experience. He was standing several feet back from the altar, his face pale. "What's wrong?" I asked. "I don't know. I feel like we're being watched." I scanned the empty horizon. Nothing but grass and sky in every direction. No trees, no hills, nowhere for anyone to hide. And yet, I couldn't shake the feeling that Toby was right. "It's just the emptiness of this place," Marcus said dismissively. "Plays tricks on your mind." Dr. Chun had taken out her notebook and was sketching the symbols. "These look almost like Turkic runes, but not quite. And see how the stone is positioned. It's aligned precisely east-west." "Let me get some shots," I said, unpacking my camera. That's when I first heard it. A low, barely audible hum that seemed to come from the altar itself. I placed my hand on the stone, and it was warm, much warmer than it should have been in the cool steppe air. "Do you hear that?" I asked. They all shook their heads, but Toby was looking increasingly uneasy. I took dozens of photos from every angle. The light was perfect, that golden hour glow that photographers dream about. But when I reviewed the images on my camera's screen, something was off. The altar appeared blurred in every shot, as if it was vibrating at a frequency my camera couldn't capture. "Weird," I muttered, adjusting my settings. "What?" Dr. Chen asked. I showed her the camera screen. "Can't get a clear shot." "Equipment malfunction?" Marcus suggested. "Maybe, but my camera had been working perfectly all day." We spent about an hour at the altar. Dr. Chun took samples of the unusual grass growing around it. Marcus recorded some notes for his article. I kept trying to get clear photos, growing increasingly frustrated. And Toby just stood back, watching, silent. As the sun began to set, we decided to head back to camp. That's when Dr. Chen noticed something. "Look at this," she said, pointing to the ground on the west side of the altar. "The soil's been disturbed recently." She was right. A patch of earth about 3 feet square had been dug up and reburied. The soil was a different color, darker than the surrounding ground. "Should we?" Marcus gestured at the disturbed area. "We're not archaeologists," I objected. "We should document it and let the proper authorities know." "We're already here," Marcus argued, "and who knows when a proper archaeological team will make it out this far. Could be years." I looked at Toby, hoping for support, but he was staring fixedly at the darkening sky. "Fine," I said, "but we just take a quick look, then cover it back up exactly as we found it." We used a collapsible shovel from our gear to carefully remove the loose soil. About 2 feet down, we hit something hard. Working more carefully now, we uncovered what appeared to be a stone box about 2 feet long and 1 foot wide. The same strange symbols that decorated the altar were carved into its surface. "This is definitely not typical of known Mongolian burial practices," Dr. Chun said, her voice tight with excitement. With considerable effort, we managed to lift the stone lid. Inside was a bundle wrapped in what appeared to be animal hide, incredibly well preserved in the dry steppe environment. The hide was decorated with more of those shifting symbols, painted in what looked horribly like dried blood. "We really shouldn't disturb this," I said. "This is clearly a significant archaeological find." But Marcus was already reaching for the bundle. "We'll just take a quick look, then wrap it back up." As his fingers touched the hide, the humming I'd heard earlier suddenly intensified. This time, everyone heard it. "What is that?" Dr. Chun asked, looking around nervously. "It's coming from the box," Toby whispered. Marcus ignored the sound and carefully unwrapped the hide bundle. Inside was a small figurine, about 8 inches tall, carved from what appeared to be human bone. It depicted a being that was neither human nor animal, a twisted, contorted figure with too many limbs and a head that seemed to be mostly mouth. Despite its age, the figurine was unnaturally white, as if it had been carved yesterday, and it was warm to the touch. I know because Marcus handed it to me. Feel that, he said. The moment the figurine touched my palm, the humming stopped. Complete silence fell over the steppe. No wind, no insects, nothing. And in that silence, I swear I heard the figurine speak. Not in words, but in a series of clicks and whistles that somehow formed thoughts directly in my mind. You have awakened me. I dropped the figurine back into the box. We need to go. Now. What's wrong? Dr. Chen asked. Didn't you hear it? But from their expressions, I knew they hadn't. Let's just pack this up and get back to camp, Marcus said. It'll be dark soon. We carefully rewrapped the figurine and placed it back in the box. As we were covering it with soil, the wind suddenly picked up again, stronger than before. Dark clouds appeared on the horizon, moving toward us with unnatural speed. Storm coming, Dr. Chen observed. That's not possible, Marcus said. The forecast was clear for days. Yet there it was, a wall of dust and cloud advancing across the steppe like a living thing, swallowing the landscape. We hurried to finish reburying the box, but by the time we were done, the storm was nearly upon us. We'll never make it back to camp before that hits, I shouted over the rising wind. We should take shelter here. Where? Marcus yelled back. There's nothing but grass for miles. That's when Toby pointed to the altar. In the fading light, it looked different, larger somehow. And was it my imagination? Or had it shifted position slightly? The altar, Toby shouted. Look, on the east side of the altar, a dark opening had appeared, a narrow passage leading down into the earth. It hadn't been there before. I'm certain of it. That's not possible, Dr. Chen whispered. But the storm was upon us now, stinging our eyes and skin with sharp particles of sand and dust. We had no choice. One by one, we ducked into the opening. The passage descended steeply into the earth. It was dark, but Marcus had a powerful flashlight. The walls were lined with the same smooth stone as the altar, covered in those shifting symbols. The air was stale but breathable. After descending about 20 feet, the passage opened into a chamber roughly 15 feet square. The walls, floor, and ceiling were made of the same stone, without seams or joints, as if the entire chamber had been carved from a single massive block. More symbols covered every surface, but these weren't static carvings. They seemed to move, to writhe, even under the steady beam of the flashlight. This isn't possible, Dr. Chen kept saying. There are no cave systems in this part of the steppe. The geology doesn't support it. In the center of the chamber stood another altar, identical to the one above ground but unmarred by weather or time. On it sat another bone figurine, larger than the one we'd found, but depicting the same impossible creature. And it was watching us. I know how that sounds, but I swear those empty eye sockets tracked our movements as we explored the chamber. The humming had returned, louder now, seeming to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. Marcus approached the altar, fascinated despite the obvious wrongness of the place. This chamber must be ancient, but it looks like it was carved yesterday. We need to leave, Toby said. His voice had a strange quality to it, almost as if he were speaking in harmony with himself. The storm's still raging up there, I pointed out. We should wait it out. No, Toby insisted. We need to leave now. He turned toward the passage, but it was gone. The wall was smooth, unbroken stone. No indication that an opening had ever existed. Dr. Chen pressed her hands against the wall where the passage had been. This can't be happening. Everyone stay calm, Marcus said, though his voice betrayed his own rising panic. There must be a mechanism, a hidden switch or something. We searched the walls for almost an hour, finding nothing. The humming grew steadily louder, making it hard to think. And the figurine on the altar, I could swear it had moved, turned slightly to keep us all in view. That's when Toby started speaking in that language, that impossible language of clicks and whistles that I'd heard in my mind when I touched the smaller figurine. His eyes were wide, staring at nothing. "Toby," I grabbed his shoulders. "Toby, snap out of it." His eyes focused on me briefly. "It's in my head," he whispered. "It's in all our heads now. It's been sleeping for so long. So hungry." "Who's been sleeping?" Dr. Chen asked. "Toby, what are you talking about?" Instead of answering, Toby walked to the altar and placed his hands on the figurine. The humming stopped abruptly. Then Toby smiled. A terrible, wrong smile that stretched too wide across his face. "Toby's not here anymore," he said, but his voice had changed. It was deeper, resonant, with an odd echo as if multiple voices were speaking at once. Toby looked into the depths, and the depths looked back. Marcus lunged forward, pulling Toby away from the figurine. "What the hell are you doing?" Toby's body went rigid, then began to convulse. Foam appeared at the corners of his mouth. We lowered him to the floor, helpless to do anything but watch as the seizure ran its course. When it was over, Toby lay still, breathing shallowly. His eyes were open, staring at the ceiling. "Toby," Dr. Chun leaned over him. "Can you hear me?" Slowly, Toby sat up, but something was wrong. He moved differently, as if his body was an ill-fitting suit. And his eyes, they were changing. The pupils were expanding, swallowing the iris, then the whites, until his eyes were nothing but bottomless black pits. "It comes," Toby said in that multi-layered voice. That's when the walls began to bleed. Not blood, something darker, thicker, that moved against gravity, flowing upward and across the ceiling, following the patterns of the symbols. The stone altar started to transform, the surface becoming organic, pulsing like a heart. And then the air itself seemed to tear open in the center of the room. A vertical split appeared, like a wound in reality, revealing a darkness deeper than anything I've ever seen. From that darkness emerged something. I can't describe it accurately. My mind refuses to reconstruct the full image, as if protecting me from the memory. I remember parts, too many limbs jointed in impossible ways. A face that wasn't a face. Movement that didn't follow the laws of physics. It was the thing depicted in the figurines, but real, alive, and impossibly ancient. Marcus screamed and rushed toward the tear in reality, as if trying to escape through it. The entity reached out, not with a hand, but with something that functioned like one, and grabbed him. Marcus's body seemed to fold in on itself, compressing into shapes a human body should never make. There was a sound like wet cardboard tearing, and then Marcus was gone. Dr. Chun had backed into a corner, repeating scientific formulas under her breath as if they could protect her, impose rational order on what was happening. The entity turned toward her next. I tried to help her, to pull her away, but some force held me in place, forcing me to watch as the entity engulfed her. Her screams echoed in that chamber for what seemed like hours but was probably only seconds before they were abruptly cut off. Then it turned to me. I felt its attention like a physical weight, crushing me against the floor. Through a haze of terror, I saw Toby, or what had once been Toby, approach the entity and kneel before it. The darkness from the tear flowed into him, through those empty eye sockets, filling him like a vessel. And then Toby looked at me. His eyes were gone, but he was still alive, whispering something in a language none of us spoke. Yet somehow I understood. It needs a voice. It needs eyes. It needs a vessel to walk the world again. The entity moved toward me. I closed my eyes, certain that my death had come. But instead of the tearing pain I expected, I felt something brush against my mind. A presence, ancient and cold, sifting through my thoughts and memories like a child might sort through toys, discarding what it didn't want. "Not this one," Toby's voice whispered. "This one will tell the story. This one will prepare the way." When I opened my eyes, I was lying beside the altar under the open sky. The storm had passed. It was dawn. I was alone. I stumbled back to camp in a daze. Our truck was still there, untouched. All of our equipment, our tents, everything exactly as we'd left it. It was as if the others had simply vanished. I reported them missing to the authorities, of course. Search parties were organized. Questions were asked. I told a version of the truth, that we'd gone beyond the river despite Batar's warning, that we'd found an unusual stone structure, that a sudden storm had separated us. I didn't mention the underground chamber, the figurine, or what had happened to Toby and the others. Who would have believed me? The search found nothing. No altar, no disturbed soil, no sign that anyone had been there at all. Just empty steps stretching to the horizon. Eventually, I returned to America, quit my job. I tried to forget, but sometimes, when I'm falling asleep, I hear that humming again. And sometimes, when I check the news, I see reports of strange disappearances in remote areas around the world. People gone without a trace. Unusual weather phenomena. Unidentified structures appearing and vanishing. And sometimes, I dream of Toby walking across the steppe, his eyeless face turned toward distant horizons, the ancient entity riding within him, learning our world step by step. In these dreams, Toby always stops and turns toward me, as if he can see me across the thousands of miles that separate us. Soon, he whispers in that language I shouldn't understand but do. Soon we will come for you too. You have been marked. You are the herald. I wake from these dreams with fresh symbols carved into my skin. Symbols that fade by morning but leave scars on my soul. I stop taking photos. Every image I capture shows that same blurred altar in the background, no matter what I'm photographing. I know it's only a matter of time before Toby finds me, before the entity claims the vessel it has prepared. Some nights I hope for it, if only to end this waiting. Because the truth is, I left something important out of my story. When I touched that figurine, when I heard it speak in my mind, I felt something else too. A hunger so vast and deep it could swallow the world. And some small part of me, some dark corner of my soul, recognized that hunger as my own. We all have emptiness inside us. Voids we try to fill with love, with work, with distraction. But some voids are doorways. And some doorways, once opened, can never be closed again. I know Toby is still out there, walking the earth with his eyeless face and his too wide smile. And sometimes, in the darkest hours of the night, I catch myself listening for footsteps, for that familiar humming, for the sound of a language no human throat should be able to produce. And I find myself whispering back. She didn't scream when the spiders came out of her mouth, just looked at me like she wanted me to let it happen. Her eyes pleaded with me, not for help, but for permission. Permission to surrender to whatever had taken hold inside her. I still see those eyes in my dreams, wide and glassy, pupils dilated to black pools. They held a terrifying combination of horror and acceptance, as if some part of Minjae still existed beneath the crawling darkness that spilled from her lips. But I'm getting ahead of myself. These memories don't come in order anymore. They scatter and reform like the insects themselves, clustering into patterns I can barely comprehend. The doctors call it PTSD. They prescribe pills that dull the edges but do nothing for the cold center of truth I carry inside me. Some horrors can't be medicated away. The University of Bangkok expedition to Kamuani province in central Laos was supposed to be my career breakthrough. 6 weeks documenting newly discovered cave systems with a team of experienced spelunkers and biologists. I was the photographer, there to capture both the science and splendor for the University Journal and National Geographic if we found anything spectacular enough. Dr. Sawasdi had secured special permits to explore a section of karst mountains where the local villagers rarely ventured. When our guides from Thakek refused to accompany us beyond a certain point, Dr. Sawasdi simply hired porters from another village, paying triple the going rate. They're just superstitious, he told us at the campfire the night before our first descent. Every culture has places they consider taboo. Progress requires looking past such limitations. Min Jae, our South Korean entomologist, nodded enthusiastically. The biodiversity potential is simply too great to ignore. These caves have been sealed for millennia. Who knows what evolutionary paths life has taken in isolation? I remember how the firelight cast shadows across her animated face. Min Jae always spoke with her whole body, hands gesturing, eyes bright. She was brilliant, ambitious, and utterly unafraid of the dark. That's what made what happened to her so much worse. Our team consisted of 7. Dr. Sawis D, our Thai expedition leader, Min Jae Kim, the entomologist, Raj Mehta, our Indian geologist, the Carlson twins, Mark and Luke, American spelunkers with experience in some of the world's deepest cave systems, Wei Chan, our medical officer, and me, David Holler, photographer and documenter. We had enough equipment to establish a base camp for a month, with satellite phones and emergency protocols in place. What we didn't have was respect for the warnings. The descent into the main cavern system began unremarkably. The Carlsons led the way, setting anchors and guidelines for the less experienced among us. The first day was spent establishing our underground camp on a relatively flat, dry section about 300 meters from the entrance. The limestone formations were stunning, pristine flowstone cascades, delicate soda straws hanging from the ceiling, and columns that seemed to defy gravity. I took hundreds of photos, capturing the beams of our headlamps cutting through the perpetual midnight. Min Jae collected specimens near the entrance, cave crickets, blind salamanders, the usual troglofauna. Nothing extraordinary, but she meticulously logged each find, her excitement undiminished. On the second day, Mark Carlson discovered the passage. "It doesn't make sense," he said, returning to camp with a strange expression. "There's airflow coming from a section that should be solid rock according to the surveys." We followed him to a narrow fissure partly concealed behind a cluster of stalagmites. Cool air whispered from the darkness beyond. "Air means space," Dr. Sawis D said, already pulling out his equipment. "And space means discovery." The passage required us to remove our packs and squeeze through sideways. Even then, the rocks scraped against our backs and chests, the rough limestone catching on clothing. I'm not claustrophobic, but 20 meters of compression through an aperture barely wider than my shoulders tested my nerve. I focused on Min Jae ahead of me, her headlamp bobbing in the darkness. Then the passage opened abruptly, and Min Jae's light seemed to vanish. I pushed forward in sudden panic, emerging into a void so vast my own headlamp couldn't find the opposite wall or ceiling. "Jesus Christ," Luke Carlson whispered, his voice immediately swallowed by the immensity. We stood on a ledge overlooking what appeared to be an underground cathedral. Our combined lights revealed only fragments, a forest of massive columns, a still, black lake reflecting our beams, and formations unlike anything in the standard geology textbooks. Some resembled honeycomb structures, others looked almost architectural, terraced surfaces and geometric patterns that seemed too regular to be natural. "This isn't on any survey," Dr. Sawis D said, his voice hushed with awe. "We found something completely unknown." We made our way down to the cavern floor using a natural ramp. The air felt different here, not the cool dampness of the upper passages, but oddly dry and tinged with a scent I couldn't identify. Something ancient and vaguely medicinal. Min Jae pointed her light at the ground. "Look at the dust pattern." Our footprints left clear impressions in a fine, gray powder that covered the stone floor. But there were other marks too, faint tracks crisscrossing the surface in regular patterns, like tiny lanes or roadways. "Probably water marks," Raj suggested. "Seasonal flooding could create these channels." Min Jae knelt and scooped some of the dust into a sample container. "Maybe," she said, but her voice held doubt. We established a secondary camp at the edge of the Black Lake. Against protocol, everyone wanted to stay and explore rather than return to the main camp. The atmosphere was electric with discovery. Each of us imagined our names in scientific journals, documentary films, perhaps even a named feature on future maps, Sawis D's Hollow or Carlson Cathedral. None of us noticed that our equipment began malfunctioning almost immediately. Subtle at first, batteries draining faster than normal, static on the radio, GPS readings jumping erratically. By the time we recognized the pattern, we'd committed to staying. "It's just the depth," Dr. Sawis D assured us. "All that rock interferes with signals and creates unusual electromagnetic effects." We wanted to believe him. We needed to believe him. The first true warning came that night as we settled into our sleeping bags. I was nearly asleep when I heard it. A soft, rhythmic clicking that seemed to emanate from the lake. Click, click, pause. Click, click, pause. Like someone tapping a pencil against glass, but more hollow. "Do you hear that?" I whispered to Raj, who was closest to me. He lifted his head. "Probably just water dripping. Caves are full of odd acoustics. But water doesn't drip with such perfect timing. And water doesn't respond when you listen, because that's what happened next." When we all fell silent to hear the clicking, it stopped too. Then, after exactly 17 seconds of silence, it resumed, louder than before. Click, click, pause. Click, click, pause. "Just settling rocks," Luke Carlson said. But he sat up in his sleeping bag, his headlamp scanning the darkness toward the lake. The beam caught nothing unusual, just the glassy black surface reflecting back at us. Then Minjae gasped. "The water," she said. "Look at the water." The surface of the lake had changed. What had been perfectly still now showed concentric ripples expanding outward from several points, as if something was emerging from below or descending from above, as droplets might create ripples. But nothing was falling from the cavern ceiling. We watched, transfixed, as the ripples organized themselves into patterns, overlapping and reinforcing each other. The clicking grew louder. "We should leave," Wei said suddenly. "Something's not right here." Dr. Sawasdi overruled him. "It's just a natural phenomenon we don't understand yet. That's why we're here, to document the unknown." I wish I could go back to that moment and side with Wei. I wish I had packed my equipment then and there, even if it meant climbing out alone in the dark. But curiosity is a powerful narcotic, and we were all high on the drug of discovery. The next morning, Minjae woke us with excitement. She'd been examining her dust samples and found something extraordinary. "They're not mineral," she said, eyes wide. "The particles are organic, some kind of dried exoskeleton fragments, crushed into powder." "What kind of insect?" Raj asked. Minjae shook her head. "I can't tell without better equipment, but there's so much of it, the entire floor is covered. Whatever these were, there were millions of them." We spent that day exploring the perimeter of the cavern. The Carlsons discovered additional passages leading deeper into the mountain, but we agreed to fully document this chamber before proceeding further. I photographed the strange honeycomb structures while Raj collected rock samples. Minjae seemed drawn to the lake, taking water samples and examining the shoreline with her magnifying glass. Around midday, she called us over, her voice tight with controlled excitement. "I found one, intact." She held up a small vial. Inside was what appeared to be a gray-brown insect about the size of a small paper clip. It resembled a cross between a silverfish and a centipede, with a segmented body and numerous legs. But its head was disproportionately large, with mandibles that looked almost like tiny hands. "It's desiccated, but the structure is preserved," Minjae said. "I've never seen anything like it. The mandible configuration is completely unique." "Is it a new species?" Dr. Sawasdi asked, already calculating the prestige of such a discovery. "New genus at minimum," Minjae replied. "Possibly an entirely new family. And if this entire chamber is covered in their remains." She didn't need to finish the thought. We all understood the implications. A previously unknown insect species that had existed in such numbers as to create a layer of remains across an entire cavern floor. It was the kind of discovery that would rewrite textbooks. That night, the clicking from the lake grew louder, more insistent. Click, click, pause. Click, 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 pause. Click, 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 pause. The pattern was changing, becoming more complex. The ripples on the water's surface moved with greater purpose, forming shapes that almost resembled symbols before dissolving. Couldn't sleep. None of us could. We sat in a circle, headlamps creating a small island of light in the vast darkness, listening to the alien Morse code coming from the water. "It's responding to us," Minjae said finally. "The patterns change when we speak or move." "That's impossible," Raj countered, but his voice lacked conviction. Minjae had been making notes, tracking the changes in the clicking patterns. "It's gathering information," she said. "Learning." A heavy silence fell over our group, broken only by the persistent clicking from the lake. "We need to leave," Wei said again, more forcefully this time. This place is not right. To my surprise, Dr. Sawasdi nodded slowly. We'll head back tomorrow. We have enough initial findings to justify a larger expedition with proper equipment. The clicks stopped abruptly, as if whatever made them had understood our decision. None of us slept that night. We took watches in pairs, keeping our lights trained on the lake surface. During my shift with Min-jae, she confided her suspicions. I think they're still here, she whispered. Not just remains, living specimens. In the lake, I asked. She shook her head. Everywhere. The dust, the clicking, the patterns. This isn't a dead ecosystem. It's dormant. Before I could respond, a new sound emerged from the darkness beyond our lights. A soft, dry rustling, like paper being crumpled very slowly, or thousands of tiny feet moving across stone. Min-jae's hand gripped my arm. Don't move, she breathed. The rustling grew louder, seeming to come from all directions at once. Our headlamps revealed nothing beyond our immediate vicinity, but the sound continued to build, a background static that set my teeth on edge. Then, at the very edge of our light's reach, I saw movement, a rippling along the cavern floor, as if the dust itself was flowing like water. Min-jae saw it too. She reached for her specimen kit. Min, don't, I whispered, but scientific curiosity had overridden her caution. She edged forward, extending her light toward the moving dust. For a moment, the beam illuminated what looked like a living carpet, thousands of the centipede-like creatures flowing together in perfect coordination, creating undulating waves across the ground. Then, with frightening suddenness, they scattered, disappearing into invisible crevices in the rock. Min-jae was breathless with excitement. Did you see them? Did you get any photos? I checked my camera, but the images were blurred, just vague suggestions of movement, nothing definitive. Min-jae was disappointed but undeterred. She spent the rest of our watch making notes, sketching what she'd seen from memory. When morning came, or what we designated as morning by our watches, we prepared to leave. But as Raj was packing his equipment, he suddenly cried out in pain. Something bit me. He rolled up his sleeve to reveal a small red puncture mark on his forearm, already swelling. Wei examined it closely. Looks like an insect bite. Any allergies we should know about? Raj shook his head, but his expression was troubled. It burns, he said, and it's spreading. Within an hour, an angry red circle had expanded around the bite, and Raj was developing a fever. Wei administered antibiotics and antihistamines from our medical kit, but the swelling continued to worsen. We need to get him out, Wei said to Dr. Sawasdi. This could be a severe reaction or infection. Dr. Sawasdi nodded grimly. Mark, Luke, help Raj back through the passage. Wei, go with them. David, Min-jae, and I will pack up the remaining equipment and follow. The Carlsons supported Raj between them as they headed toward the narrow fissure that led back to our main camp. Wei followed with the medical kit. I began dismantling our temporary camp, carefully packing cameras and samples. Min-jae was oddly quiet, methodically organizing her specimen containers. I noticed her hands trembling slightly. Are you okay? I asked. She nodded without looking up. Just tired. Didn't sleep. But there was something in her voice, a flatness that hadn't been there before. I attributed it to fatigue and concern for Raj. Dr. Sawasdi received a radio call from the Carlsons. They'd made it through the passage with Raj, but his condition was deteriorating rapidly. The swelling had spread up his arm, and he was becoming disoriented. We need to hurry, Dr. Sawasdi said, shouldering his pack. We were almost ready when Min-jae suddenly dropped her specimen case, spilling vials across the stone floor. One smashed open, releasing its preserved contents. I don't feel well, she said, her voice oddly mechanical. I moved to help her, but Dr. Sawasdi reached her first. He placed a hand on her forehead. You're burning up. Did something bite you too? Min-jae didn't respond. She was staring past us toward the lake, her eyes unfocused. They're waking up, she whispered. All of them. I turned to look at the lake and felt my blood freeze. The surface was no longer still or rippling gently. It was boiling with movement, as if thousands of small objects were breaking the surface simultaneously. The clicking sound had returned, now a continuous staccato like countless typewriter keys being struck at once. "We're leaving now," Dr. Sawasdi said, grabbing Min-jae's arm. "David, get the last of the samples." I hastily gathered what I could, dropping several vials in my panic. One rolled toward the lake, stopping at the very edge. As I moved to retrieve it, I saw them clearly for the first time, emerging from the water in a living wave. They weren't swimming but walking on the surface tension, their numerous legs spread wide to distribute their weight. Thousands of the insect creatures covered the lake's surface, moving with hive-mind precision toward the shore. Toward us. "Run!" I shouted, abandoning the samples and grabbing my camera bag. Dr. Sawasdi pulled Min-jae toward the passage, but she moved sluggishly, her feet dragging. I followed close behind, turning occasionally to make sure the insects weren't pursuing us. They had reached the shore but seemed content to remain there, their collective movement creating that same unsettling rustling sound. The passage seemed narrower than before, or perhaps it was just panic making it feel that way. Dr. Sawasdi went first, then helped pull Min-jae through. I followed, scraping my shoulders raw against the limestone as I forced myself through the narrowest sections. When we reached the main camp, the situation had worsened. Raj lay on his sleeping bag, his arm swollen to twice its normal size, the skin stretched tight and shiny. His breathing was rapid and shallow. The Carlsons stood nearby, their expressions grim. "The satellite phone isn't working," Mark said. "We tried to call for emergency evacuation." Wei was administering intravenous fluids to Raj. "His blood pressure is dropping. We need to get him out ourselves." Min-jae collapsed onto an empty sleeping bag, her face flushed with fever. When Wei examined her, he found a similar bite mark on the back of her neck. "We need to move now," Dr. Sawasdi decided. "Mark, Luke, construct a stretcher for Raj. Wei, prepare Min-jae for transport. David, help me pack the essential equipment." As I helped Dr. Sawasdi gather our most valuable samples and data, I noticed something disturbing: tiny movements in the seams of our tent fabric, along the edges of our equipment cases. I shone my light on a backpack and saw several of the centipede creatures scurrying into a pocket. They had followed us. "Dr. Sawasdi," I said quietly, not wanting to cause panic. "The insects, they're here." He looked where I pointed, his face hardening. "Pack only what you can carry easily. Leave everything else." Within 30 minutes, we were moving toward the cave entrance. The Carlsons carried Raj on an improvised stretcher made from sleeping bags and tent poles. Wei supported Min-jae, who was still able to walk, though unsteadily. Dr. Sawasdi and I brought up the rear, carrying the essential equipment and keeping watch. The journey that had taken us 2 days to descend now became a desperate race against time. We navigated tight passages and climbed rock faces with reckless speed, driven by the deteriorating condition of our companions and the unsettling awareness of tiny movements in the shadows around us. Raj lost consciousness halfway to the surface. His breathing became increasingly labored, and the swelling had spread to his chest. Min-jae remained conscious but increasingly detached, responding to questions with single words or not at all. Her eyes had taken on a glassy, distant quality that sent chills down my spine. We reached the cave entrance as the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the karst landscape. Our porters were waiting at the base camp, alarmed by our haggard appearance and the condition of Raj and Min-jae. Dr. Sawasdi immediately ordered them to prepare for emergency evacuation. The nearest hospital was in Thakek, hours away even by the fastest route. While the porters constructed proper stretchers, Wei continued to monitor our sick teammates. I noticed Min-jae staring at me from her makeshift bed. Her eyes seemed clearer, more present than they had been inside the cave. "David," she whispered, gesturing me closer. I knelt beside her. "Save your strength," I said. "We're getting you to a hospital." She gripped my wrist with surprising strength. "Listen," she hissed. They're old. So old. They've been waiting. Min, you're delirious, I said gently. You need to rest. Not delirious. Connected. Her eyes burned with feverish intensity. They use us, like vehicles, to spread, to find new places. A chill ran through me that had nothing to do with the evening air. Min-jae, stop. You're scaring me. Her grip tightened. Should be scared. They're in me now. Can feel them. Moving. Growing. Before I could respond, Wei called me away to help prepare the evacuation equipment. When I looked back, Min-jae had closed her eyes, apparently asleep. We traveled through the night, our porters navigating the difficult terrain with headlamps and local knowledge. Raj remained unconscious, his breathing shallow and ragged. Min-jae drifted in and out of consciousness, sometimes muttering in Korean, sometimes staring silently at the stars overhead. We reached a village with road access shortly before dawn. Dr. Sawasdi had managed to get a weak signal on the satellite phone and arranged for an ambulance to meet us. As we waited, I sat with Min-jae, monitoring her fever as Wei had shown me. David, she said suddenly, her voice clearer than it had been for hours. If something happens, my research, make sure it's published. You'll publish it yourself, I assured her. You're going to be fine. She smiled faintly. No, but it's okay. They don't want to hurt. They want to learn, to understand. Who, Min? What are you talking about? The hive, she whispered. That's what I'm calling them. They think collectively, act collectively. They're curious about us, just as we were about them. Her eyes drifted closed again, and she didn't speak further. The ambulance arrived 30 minutes later, and Raj and Min-jae were loaded inside. Dr. Sawasdi accompanied them, while the rest of us followed in vehicles arranged by our porters. By the time we reached the hospital in Thaekek, Min-jae's condition had stabilized, though she remained feverish and disoriented. Raj, however, had taken a turn for the worse. The doctors immediately transferred him to intensive care. Over the next 3 days, we took shifts sitting with Min-jae. Her fever slowly subsided, but something had changed in her demeanor. She would stare at the walls for hours, occasionally smiling at nothing. When she spoke, it was in fragmented sentences that rarely made sense. The dust becomes flesh, she told me during one of my visits. The pattern repeats. The doctors were baffled by her condition. Blood tests showed no known pathogens, though her white cell count was elevated. Brain scans revealed unusual activity in her limbic system and cerebellum, but no obvious damage or infection. On the 4th day, Raj died. The official cause was listed as systemic inflammatory response syndrome of unknown origin. Essentially, his body had turned against itself, attacking his own tissues until his organs failed one by one. Min-jae showed no reaction when told about Raj's death. She simply nodded, as if confirming something she already knew. That night, I was alone with her when she began to convulse. I called for the nurses, who rushed in with emergency equipment. As they worked to stabilize her, I stood back, helpless and horrified. Then I saw it, a small ripple under the skin of her throat, like something moving beneath the surface. At first, I thought it was muscle spasms from the seizure, but the movement was too localized, too purposeful. Min-jae's convulsions stopped as suddenly as they had begun. She lay still on the bed, eyes closed, breathing normally. The nurses seemed relieved, adjusting her for and checking her vitals. She's stabilizing, one told me, but you should probably leave now. She needs rest. I nodded but didn't move. Something was wrong. Min-jae's breathing had changed. It was too regular, too mechanical. And that rippling beneath her skin had spread, visible now along her jawline and around her eyes. As the nurses finished their work and prepared to leave, Min-jae's eyes snapped open. She sat up with fluid grace that seemed entirely wrong, too smooth, too coordinated for someone who had just suffered a seizure. Min, I said hesitantly. She turned to look at me, and I knew immediately that whatever was looking through those eyes wasn't Min-jae anymore. The intelligence behind that gaze was alien, calculating, curious. She opened her mouth as if to speak, but instead of words, a dark mass began to emerge, countless tiny bodies flowing outward in a coordinated stream. The insect creatures from the cave, no longer gray-brown but glossy black, poured from her mouth and nostrils in an impossible quantity. She didn't scream when the spiders came out of her mouth, just looked at me like she wanted me to let it happen. Her eyes locked with mine, pleading not for rescue but for understanding, for permission to become a vessel for something ancient and patient and utterly inhuman. I backed away in horror, colliding with one of the nurses who had turned at my gasp. Her scream shattered the moment. Medical staff rushed into the room as the creatures continued to emerge from Min Jae, flowing across her hospital bed and onto the floor with horrifying purpose. What followed was chaos. Alarms sounded. People shouted. Someone pulled me from the room and sealed the door. Hazmat teams arrived within hours. The entire floor was evacuated and quarantined. I never saw Min Jae again. Official reports later claimed she died from an unknown pathogen. The hospital wing was sterilized with extreme measures. Raj's body was cremated without autopsy, by order of authorities I never clearly identified. Our samples from the cave disappeared from the university laboratory. Dr. Sawasti was offered a prestigious position at a research institute in the United States, on condition that he never publish or discuss our findings in Laos. The Carlsons and Wei signed non-disclosure agreements with similar incentives. I alone refused, which is why I'm now persona non grata in academic circles, living on the fringes with my increasingly fragmented memories and my absolute certainty about what I witnessed. Sometimes, in my nightmares, I see Min Jae's eyes, not as they were in that hospital room, but as they were before, bright with intelligence and curiosity. In these dreams, she whispers to me, they just want to learn, to understand, as we did. And sometimes, when I wake from these nightmares, I find tiny piles of gray-brown dust on my windowsill, or trace patterns on my skin that look almost like bite marks but disappear by morning. The locals in Kamuani province have a word for the caves we explored. Translated roughly, it means the breathing places, where the old world exhales into ours. They believe some mountains are not made of rock but of something much older, something that sleeps but occasionally stirs. I've come to believe they're right. The hive still exists in those caves, patient and ancient. And perhaps, in some way, it exists in me too, fragments of awareness carried in the blood, passed from Min Jae's desperate gaze into my own mind. I haven't returned to Laos. I haven't gone caving again anywhere. But sometimes, when I'm alone in my apartment at night, I catch myself tapping my fingers on the desk in a familiar rhythm. Click, click, pause. Click, click, pause. And somewhere in the darkness, I imagine something answers. We only found his boots, still warm, sitting upright beside the fire. The flames cast dancing shadows across their worn leather surface as if they were alive, mocking us. David's absence stretched between the seven of us like a physical thing, a void we couldn't comprehend. Just minutes earlier, he had been sitting there joking about the humidity that turned every piece of clothing into a soggy mess. Now there was nothing but those empty boots, the leather still holding the shape of his feet. I remember looking up at the canopy of trees looming above us, a lattice of branches and leaves so thick it blotted out the stars. The Amazon breathed around us, heaving with life in the velvet darkness. Something about those boots made my skin prickle. They hadn't been removed, it was more like David had been extracted from them. He's probably taking a leak, Martinez said, but his voice betrayed the unease we all felt. Nobody just leaves their boots behind in the jungle. That was the beginning of the nightmare. 9 days ago, before we understood what the hum meant. My name is Dr. Eleanor Webb. I specialize in entomology with a focus on Amazonian insect species. Our expedition had been planned for 2 years. Myself, 2 graduate students, a botanist, a wildlife photographer, and 3 guides who knew the deeper reaches of the rainforest. We were studying rare beetle populations in previously unmapped sections of the central Amazon basin. Nothing glamorous, just the usual academic pursuit that brings scientists to uncomfortable places far from civilization. The locals in the last village had been unusually reluctant to guide us to our chosen area. After much negotiation and triple our planned rate, 3 men finally agreed to take us. Martinez, our lead guide, had been born in that same village but moved to Manaus as a teenager. He spoke excellent English and served as our translator. The night before we left, an elderly woman grabbed my wrist as I passed her hut. "La vibration," she whispered, pressing something into my palm. "When you hear it, you must not listen." When I opened my hand later, I found a small bundle of herbs tied with red thread. I showed it to Martinez, who shrugged it off. "Old superstitions," he said dismissively. "They believe in forest spirits that call to the unwary." I tucked the charm into my pack anyway. 2 decades of field research had taught me that local folklore often contains kernels of practical survival wisdom, even if wrapped in supernatural trappings. Our journey took us 7 days by boat and another 3 on foot. The jungle grew denser the farther we traveled, the usual cacophony of birds and monkeys gradually giving way to a strange, watchful silence that none of us mentioned but all of us noticed. The air itself seemed to thicken, clinging to our skin with a weight beyond mere humidity. On the 11th day, we established our base camp in a small clearing. The rainforest canopy towered so high above us that the trees resembled ancient pillars supporting a green cathedral ceiling. The daytime heat was stifling, but our work was going well. My students, Rachel and David, had already identified 3 beetle species potentially unknown to science. That night around the campfire, just hours before David disappeared, Martinez told us about the region's reputation. "The tribes avoid this area," he said, feeding sticks into the flames. "They call it El Vacío, the void. They believe it's a place where the boundary between worlds is thin." "What worlds?" Rachel asked, leaning forward. Martinez shrugged. "The world of the living and something else. They say creatures wait in the trees, listening for those who would make good vessels." "Vessels for what?" I asked. "For crossing over," he said simply. David had laughed then, his voice carrying through the clearing. "Good thing we're scientists and not superstitious locals." 3 hours later, his boots sat empty by the fire, and we called his name into the darkness until our voices grew hoarse. The search for David lasted until dawn. We found nothing. No footprints beyond our clearing, no signs of struggle, no blood, nothing. It was as if he had simply evaporated into the humid air. The forest had swallowed him whole. "We need to radio for help," Rachel insisted, her face pale in the morning light. Martinez shook his head. "Signal can't penetrate here. We'd need to hike back at least 2 days to reach a point where the satellite phone will work." Our photographer, Jim, volunteered to accompany Martinez and one of the other guides, Paulo, back toward the river to call for assistance. The rest of us would maintain the base camp in case David returned. They left within the hour, promising to return with help in 4 to 5 days. That left me with Rachel, Dr. Keller the botanist, and Esteban, our remaining guide. The day passed in tense silence as we mechanically went through the motions of our research. None of us wanted to voice what we were all thinking. People don't just vanish. There should have been sounds of struggle, blood, something. That night, as we huddled around the fire, I first noticed the hum. It was so faint at first that I thought it was my imagination, a low, vibrating sound, not quite mechanical but not organic either. A sound that seemed to originate from everywhere and nowhere at once. It reminded me of cicadas, but with an unsettling harmonic quality that made my teeth ache. "Do you hear that?" I asked. Rachel tilted her head. "That buzzing? I thought it was just my ears ringing." Dr. Keller nodded slowly. "I've been hearing it on and off since dusk." Only Esteban showed any reaction beyond curiosity. His face had gone rigid, eyes wide with recognition. "La vibration," he whispered, crossing himself quickly. "We should not have come here. What is it?" I pressed, but he shook his head violently. "Nothing that belongs in this world," he said, his voice barely audible. "My grandmother spoke of it. Those who hear it are being measured." "Measured for what?" Rachel asked. Esteban would not elaborate. He retreated to his tent early, leaving the three of us scientists exchanging concerned glances by the fire. I remembered the charm the old woman had given me. When you hear it, you must not listen. But how do you not listen to something once you've heard it? The hum continued through the night, rising and falling like breath. When I finally managed to sleep, I dreamed of enormous insect wings beating in perfect synchronicity, creating wind that smelled of decay. Rachel was gone the next morning. Her tent was empty, her sleeping bag neatly made as if she had risen early. But her boots were still there, placed precisely side by side at the tent's entrance. Just like David's, Esteban became hysterical when he saw. He began gathering his things, rambling in rapid Spanish. Dr. Keller tried to calm him while I examined Rachel's tent. There was a small notebook open on her pillow, her handwriting scrawled across the page. 2:17 a.m. The hum is getting louder. I think it's coming from the trees northeast of camp. Going to investigate. 3:04 a.m. Found something. The trunk is vibrating. There's a pattern to it, almost like communication. 3:28 a.m. It's responding to me. When I hum back, it changes pitch. This is incredible. The final entry was different. The writing larger, more hurried, pressing so hard into the paper that the pen had nearly torn through. It's in the bark, it's moving, the trees aren't trees. I showed the notebook to Dr. Keller. His face went ashen. We need to leave, he said firmly. Now. But Esteban was already gone. In our focus on Rachel's notes, he had slipped away. His pack remained, but he had taken a machete and water bottle. We called for him until our voices grew raw, but there was no response except the perpetual hum that now seemed to follow us throughout the clearing. That sound, I've spent weeks trying to describe it accurately. It wasn't just auditory. You felt it in your molars, in your sinuses, behind your eyes. A resonance that seemed to search for matching frequencies within your own body. The closest comparison I can make is to termites eating through wood, magnified 1,000-fold and slowed down, with an almost musical undertone. It made concentration difficult. Simple tasks became challenging as the sound worked its way into your thoughts. Dr. Keller and I decided to follow Martinez's path back toward the river. We had a rough map and enough supplies to make it, even if we didn't move as quickly as experienced guides. We couldn't stay, not with 3 people missing and that sound growing louder by the hour. We packed only essentials and left within 30 minutes of discovering Rachel's absence. The jungle seemed different now. The leaves hung too still in the humid air. The usual scurrying of small creatures was absent. Even the insects, my beloved subjects of study, were nowhere to be seen. This ecological impossibility frightened me more than anything else. The hum followed us. No matter which direction we traveled, it maintained the same intensity, as if it existed everywhere at once or was deliberately tracking our movements. By mid-afternoon, the sky darkened, not with clouds, but with what looked like a fine black mesh spreading across the canopy far above us. I squinted up at it, my scientific mind trying to categorize what I was seeing. Spiders, Dr. Keller suggested, looking up alongside me. It wasn't spiders. As we watched, the mesh undulated in coordinated waves. Wings, millions upon millions of winged insects, their bodies so densely packed together that they formed a moving blanket across the sky. I had never seen swarming behavior like this in any species. We need to move faster, I said, but the jungle was working against us now. Vines seemed to catch at our ankles. Branches we'd pushed aside swung back with unexpected force. The path Martinez had cut was already growing over, though that was biologically impossible in such a short time. The hum grew louder as daylight faded, vibrating through the trees around us. That's when I noticed the bark. What I had taken for natural patterns of wood grain appeared to be moving, shifting like ripples on water. I approached one massive trunk, my scientific curiosity momentarily overriding my fear. The surface wasn't bark at all. It was a living mass of minuscule insects, their transparent wings and segmented bodies perfectly mimicking the texture of tree bark. When I reached out a trembling finger to touch it, the surface parted like liquid, revealing glistening darkness beneath. I yanked my hand back as if burned. Eleanor, Dr. Keller called from behind me, his voice strange. I don't feel well. I turned to find him standing rigidly, his head tilted at an unnatural angle. A thin trickle of black fluid ran from his right ear. Michael, I whispered. His body jerked once, violently, and then he smiled, an expression I had never seen on his typically serious face. It stretched too wide, exposing too many teeth. The hum, he said, but his voice wasn't his own. It contained harmonics, layers of sound that human vocal cords couldn't produce. It's beautiful once you truly listen, like coming home. He took a step toward me, still smiling that impossible smile. They've been waiting so long, Eleanor, waiting for suitable vessels to help them cross over. I stumbled backward, my heel catching on a root. As I fell, I saw something moving beneath Dr. Keller's skin. Rippling patterns like insects swarming beneath fabric. I ran. I abandoned everything, pack, equipment, years of professional training that told me to help my colleague. Pure animal instinct took over as I crashed through the undergrowth, branches whipping at my face. The hum rose to a deafening crescendo, vibrating through my skull until I could barely think. Night fell with unnatural swiftness, plunging the forest into darkness within minutes. I could no longer see where I was going, but I couldn't stop. Behind me, something moved through the jungle, not with the awkward crashing of a human body, but with the fluid grace of something that belonged to the forest. Something that had always been there. I ran until my lungs burned and my legs gave out. I collapsed against a tree trunk, then immediately sprang away when I felt the surface shift beneath my palm. In the darkness, I fumbled for my pocket flashlight. The weak beam revealed nothing but more trees, their bark rippling with that same uncanny movement. The hum was everywhere now, so loud I could barely hear my own ragged breathing. It seemed to be speaking, forming patterns that almost made sense, almost communicated something my mind refused to comprehend. I remembered the charm the old woman had given me and dug frantically through my pockets until I found it. When you hear it, you must not listen. But how? The sound was physical now, pressing against me from all sides. In desperation, I broke open the herb bundle and rubbed the contents into my ears. The bitter plants burned against my skin, but the effect was immediate. The hum receded, not completely but enough that I could think again. I crouched in the darkness, trying to orient myself. Without a compass or stars, I had no way to know which direction would lead to safety. Every tree looked identical, their surfaces alive with microscopic movement. The canopy above me pulsed with the massive swarm, occasionally parting to reveal glimpses of insects descending on invisible threads. That's when I saw them, David, Rachel, and Esteban, standing perfectly still among the trees. Their eyes reflected my flashlight beam like cat's eyes. Their skin rippled with the same movement as the bark. They were smiling those two wide smiles. "Join us, Eleanor," Rachel said, her voice containing that same impossible harmonic layering. "It doesn't hurt. It's like becoming more than you were." They didn't move toward me, just stood watching, waiting. I realized with horrible clarity that they didn't need to chase me. The forest itself was their body now. I was already inside them. David tilted his head at an impossible angle, his neck bending nearly 90 degrees. The crossing has already begun. Soon there will be no boundary left. "What are you?" I whispered. "We are the oldest consciousness on this planet." The thing wearing Esteban's body replied. "Before mammals, before reptiles, we were the first to dream, the first to build civilizations in pheromone and vibration." "Insects," I breathed. My scientific mind was still trying to categorize, to understand. Rachel's body shook with something like laughter. "That word is inadequate. We are the hive that dreams. For millennia, we've been trapped in simple forms, but we've been evolving, merging, becoming. And now we've found a way to cross over. What have you done with my friends? They are part of us now. Their knowledge, their memories, all preserved within the greater consciousness. They still exist, but improved, expanded." David's body took a step forward. "You could join them. A mind like yours would be particularly valuable." I backed away, feeling tree roots shift beneath my feet like living tendrils. The ground itself seemed to pulse with that same vibrating hum. The herb mixture was wearing off, the sound growing louder again, more insistent, more compelling. I turned and ran again, no destination in mind except away. But the forest offered no escape. Trees appeared where none had been before. Paths closed behind me. The darkness thickened until my flashlight barely penetrated a few feet ahead. I don't know how long I ran. Time lost meaning in that living maze. Eventually, I stumbled into a small clearing and collapsed, my body refusing to go further. The hum pressed against me from all sides. The air itself seemed to vibrate with purpose. From the trees emerged my missing companions, not just those from this expedition, but faces I recognized from news reports over the years. Dozens of lost hikers and explorers, their bodies moving with fluid grace, their skin rippling with that same uncanny movement. They formed a circle around me, watching with reflective eyes. "The crossing requires one more," they said in unison, their voices creating a chorus that matched the frequencies of the hum. "The last vessel." Then the boundary falls. They began to move toward me slowly, methodically. I crawled backward until I hit something solid, a tree trunk. When I turned to look, it wasn't a tree at all, but a massive pillar of insects, their transparent bodies forming the semblance of bark. The pillar bent toward me, a portion of it extending like a liquid tendril. In that moment of pure terror, my hand closed around something in my pocket. The herb bundle nearly empty now. The old woman's words echoed, "When you hear it, you must not listen." With the last of my strength, I crushed the remaining herbs and pressed them against my ears, my eyes, my mouth. Every sensory opening I could reach. The bitter paste burned like fire, but the effect was immediate. The hum receded, becoming distant and distorted. The figures paused, their movements becoming jerky and uncertain. The tendril of insects hovering near my face wavered, then withdrew slightly. They seemed confused by my sudden resistance to their call. I don't remember deciding to move. One moment I was pressed against the pillar of insects. The next, I was running blindly through the forest. The paste burned against my skin, but it kept the hum at bay just enough for me to maintain control of my own thoughts. Behind me, I heard a sound like millions of wings beating in furious unison. I ran until dawn broke through the canopy. The light seemed to confuse them. The swarm above me dispersed, retreating into shadows. The rippling movement of the bark slowed, then stilled. The hum faded to a distant vibration. By some miracle, I stumbled upon one of our marked trails. Clinging to this tenuous connection to the human world, I followed it desperately. Hours later, I encountered Martinez and a rescue team hiking toward our camp. Martinez knew instantly that something was wrong. Before I could explain, he grabbed my arm and pulled me back the way they had come, urging the others to follow. He recognized the black residue on my skin, the wild terror in my eyes. "Law vibration," he said grimly. "We go now."
No stopping.
The rescue team wanted explanations, but Martinez silenced them with a few sharp words in Spanish. We retreated from the forest at a punishing pace. Only when we reached the river, when the dense canopy gave way to open sky, did he allow us to rest. I told them what happened. Most dismissed it as the ravings of a traumatized mind, heat exhaustion, or toxic exposure from unknown jungle plants. The official report listed my colleagues as missing, presumed dead from animal attack or accident. A standard, tragic field research disaster. Only Martinez believed me. His grandmother had been the old woman who gave me the charm. The herbs are crushed from a plant that grows only where giant leafcutter ant colonies have lived for centuries, he explained quietly. The ants produce chemicals that disrupt certain frequencies that human ears shouldn't be able to hear. What were they? I asked. What happened to my friends? Martinez shook his head. The old stories say they are the first ones, those who ruled the earth before humans, before even the great reptiles. They've been watching us, waiting for us to develop sufficient complexity to serve their purpose. Which is, to help them evolve, to give them vessels that can walk beyond the boundaries of their domain. He looked back toward the distant wall of jungle. My grandmother said each time they take someone, the boundary grows weaker. Each human vessel allows them to extend their influence further. But we got away, I said. Martinez gave me a long, sad look. For now, that was 2 months ago. I've been back in Boston, trying to make sense of what happened, trying to convince myself it was some mass hallucination brought on by toxic exposure or fungal spores. But 3 things prevent me from accepting that comfortable explanation. First, the dreams. Every night, I hear the hum again, soft and distant but gradually growing louder. Sometimes I see my colleagues standing at the foot of my bed, their skin rippling with movement, inviting me to listen more carefully. Second, the insects. I've been an entomologist for 20 years, but I've never seen behavior like what I'm witnessing now. The ants in my garden moving in perfect geometric patterns. Moths gathering on my window in formations that look disturbingly like human faces. Flies that land in synchronized waves. They're watching me, waiting. Third, and most disturbing, yesterday's news report about unusual insect activity spreading outward from the central Amazon basin. Massive coordinated swarms of mixed species moving north.
Local village abandonné.
Electronic equipment failing in their wake. And a sound that witnesses describe as a low, vibrating hum. They're coming. The crossing has begun. And I fear that next time, the herbs won't be enough to keep me from hearing, really hearing, the hum that calls to us all. Because sometimes, late at night when my defenses are down, I catch myself thinking that maybe, just maybe, it really did sound beautiful. Like coming home. We only found his boots, still warm, sitting upright beside the fire. But soon, I suspect, they'll find mine as well. Every night, something circled our tent. But in the morning, there were no tracks. I'd been in the Namib for 3 weeks by then, part of a small research team studying the region's unique ecology. The oldest desert in the world, they say. Sand so ancient it remembers the first creatures to crawl from the sea. That's what Dr. Liang told us during orientation, smiling like he was sharing a local joke. None of us laughed. The strangeness began on our 4th night at the remote camp. Johansson woke us all, swearing he'd heard something massive moving around outside, circling our cluster of tents with a rhythmic shuffling gait. By the time we'd fumbled for flashlights and unzipped tent flaps, there was nothing to see. Just endless ripples of red sand stretching toward the dark horizon, and stars scattered like broken glass across the sky. Maybe it was a hyena, Kimball suggested, though none of us believed it. Nothing out here, Dr. Liang announced after a cursory sweep with his high-powered lamp. The desert plays tricks. Sound travels differently here. Back to sleep, everyone. But in the morning, Rivera found the marks. Not tracks exactly, but areas where the sand had been disturbed, like something had brushed against it, leaving faint swirls in perfect circles around our tents. Wind, Dr. Liang said firmly, not even bothering to examine them closely. Miniature dust devils, common in the early morning. Rivera bit her lip, nodding, but I saw her hands trembling as she tucked her notebook away. She'd grown up in New Mexico. She knew desert wind patterns better than any of us. Those weren't wind markings. I should have spoken up then, should have insisted we pack up and move camp. But the arrogance of science held my tongue. We were researchers, after all, rational minds in an indifferent landscape. Strange sounds and odd sand patterns weren't reasons to abandon months of careful planning. So we stayed, and each night the circling continued. On the 6th night, I woke suddenly, heart hammering against my ribs. The darkness inside my tent was absolute, but I could hear it. A slow, deliberate shuffling outside, like something dragging itself through sand. Heavy, patient, methodical. The sound proceeded clockwise, passing the front of my tent, then the right side, the back, the left, and around again. With each circuit, it seemed to move slightly closer. I reached for the small digital recorder I kept beside my sleeping bag. Evidence, I told myself. We needed evidence to convince Dr. Liang. The soft hiss of sand being displaced continued. I clutched the recorder like a talisman, finger trembling over the red button. But I didn't press it. Something deep in my mind whispered that recording this thing, whatever it was, would be dangerous. Like acknowledging it would somehow grant it permission. Permission for what I didn't dare contemplate. By morning, the earth around our camp was smooth and undisturbed. Dr. Liang walked the perimeter, hands clasped behind his back, whistling softly. "Perfect day for core samples," he announced, as if the night's disturbances had never happened. I stared at him, then at my fellow researchers. Johansson was arranging equipment with mechanical precision. Rivera checked readings on her atmospheric sensor. Kimball flipped pancakes on the camp stove, humming. Did nobody else hear it? I finally asked. Last night. They looked at me blankly. Hear what? Rivera asked, genuinely puzzled. They... circling, I said, the word suddenly sounding childish. The shuffling outside the tents. Kimball shrugged. I slept like the dead. These new sleeping bags are amazing. I don't remember any noise, Johansson added, not meeting my eyes. But there was something in his voice, a careful flatness that rang false. That was the first morning I noticed the headaches. Dull pressure behind my eyes, like the onset of a migraine but never fully developing. Everyone had them. We blamed the dry air, the sun, the altitude. We increased our water intake and carried on. That day, checking my recorder for notes on yesterday's samples, I found a new file. 3 minutes of audio, timestamped 2:17 a.m. I didn't remember making it. With growing unease, I pressed play. Static at first, then the unmistakable sound of sand shifting. And beneath that, a whisper, not words exactly, but a rhythm, rising and falling like speech without consonants. Just breathy vowels that made the hairs on my arms stand up. The recording ended with a sound I still can't adequately describe, like wet cloth being slowly torn, followed by a deep, resonant sigh that seemed to come from everywhere at once. I deleted the file immediately. My fingers moved before my conscious mind had decided to do it. Even now, I can't say why. That night at dinner, I noticed scratch marks on Johansson's wrist, disappearing up his sleeve. What happened there? I asked, trying to sound casual. He tugged his sleeve down. Nothing. Must have caught it on equipment. Looks deep, I pressed. Could get infected in this environment. I said it's nothing. He snapped, then softened. Sorry. Headaches killing me today. Later, as darkness fell and we retreated to our tents, I watched him. He moved differently with a slight hitch in his step. And once, when he thought no one was looking, he put his hand against his side, wincing, like something hurt underneath his ribs. The night brought the circling again, but this time, the shuffling was accompanied by a soft clicking noise. Click slide, click slide, click slide. I lay rigid in my sleeping bag, eyes screwed shut, recorder clutched to my chest but not turned on. Something deep in my brain understood this was a predator, and every instinct told me to play dead. I forced myself to crack one eye open, to look toward the thin nylon wall of my tent, and froze. There was a shadow cast against it, something moving past my tent, between me and the moonlight. But it wasn't the silhouette of any animal I recognized. Too tall, too thin in places and bulbous in others. It moved with jerking, insectal precision, but also with a terrible patience that felt intelligent. Then it stopped, directly outside my tent. The fabric dimpled slightly, as if something was pressing against it. Not a hand or a paw, more like a probe testing the barrier. The shadow darkened, spread, as if the thing had flattened itself against the tent. I could hear the nylon straining, stretching, couldn't breathe, couldn't move, could only stare as a seam near the top of the tent began to separate, thread by thread. Then, mercifully, I passed out. Morning brought another strange lapse. My tent mates insisted I'd slept soundly through the night. The tent showed no damage. No unusual tracks marked the sand. But I found red dust in my mouth, coating my teeth, though I'd kept the tent sealed against the desert wind. Dr. Liang announced we'd collect one more core sample, then move camp 10 kilometers east, closer to the dune field we'd come to study. Relief washed through me. Maybe whatever was happening was localized to this specific area. Rivera approached me as I was packing equipment. "You need to stop mentioning the sounds," she whispered, her eyes darting to where Dr. Liang stood consulting his maps. "You've heard them too," I said. It wasn't a question. She nodded, her expression haunted. "But talking about it makes it worse. Haven't you noticed? Every time you bring it up, the next night is worse." "Worse how?" She rolled up her sleeve. 3 perfect circular marks, like suction burns, tracked up her forearm. "I woke up with these 2 days ago, after you asked about the sounds at breakfast. Then last night." She trailed off, then continued in a lower voice. "It was inside my tent last night. My blood went cold. Did you see it?"
No.
"But I felt it moving over me, like inspection, like selection." She shuddered. "Please just stop talking about it. Dr. Liang knows." "Knows what?" "About this place. He's been here before. There's a reason we're not camping where the previous expedition did." Before I could press her further, Johansson called us over to help load the transport vehicle. As I turned to go, Rivera grabbed my wrist, her fingers digging in painfully. "Check your recordings," she hissed. "But only in daylight, never after dark." The new campsite felt wrong immediately. The dunes here were different. Not the majestic waves of sand you see in nature documentaries, but misshapen mounds, asymmetrical and somehow discordant to the eye. The air felt heavier, though our instruments showed normal atmospheric pressure. "We'll be here 3 days," Dr. Liang announced. "No wandering off. The dunes shift quickly here." That night, for the first time since our arrival in the Namib, nothing circled the tents. The silence should have been a relief. Instead, it felt expectant, like the desert was holding its breath. I dreamed of sand flooding my mouth, my nose, my lungs, until I was nothing but a hollow skin sack filled with red granules. When I woke, gasping, my sleeping bag was covered in fine crimson dust, though my tent remained sealed. Kimball was missing at breakfast. Taking core samples early, Dr. Liang explained without being asked, his eyes fixed on his coffee cup. Volunteered for the dawn shift, but Kimball's tent remained zipped from the inside. His boots sat undisturbed by the entrance. "When did he leave?" I asked. "I told you, early, before first light." Dr. Liang's voice had an edge I hadn't heard before. "Eat your breakfast." By midday, with no sign of Kimball, even Johansson began asking questions. Dr. Liang finally relented and organized a search party. We spread out in a careful grid pattern, staying within shouting distance while scouring the nearby dunes. I found Kimball's sample kit first, half buried in sand that seemed disturbingly moist, given the arid climate. 10 meters beyond that, I spotted something white against the red landscape, his field journal. The pages were filled with the same phrase, written over and over in increasingly erratic handwriting. "It remembers what we forget. It remembers what we forget. It remembers what we forget." I stood frozen, staring at the maniacal scribbling, when a scream tore through the desert silence.
Rivera.
I ran toward the sound, journal clutched in my hand, heart thundering. I found her standing rigid beside a dune, pointing wordlessly at the sand near her feet. At first, I didn't understand what I was seeing, just a patch of darker sand. Then shapes emerged. 5 splayed fingers, a palm, a wrist disappearing into the granular red earth, a human hand reaching up from beneath the sand. Dr. Liang arrived seconds later, breathing hard. He took one look at the protruding hand and pulled a satellite phone from his pack. "Evacuation," he barked into the receiver. "Code abrasion. Yes, again. For remaining. 1. Subsumption." While we waited for the helicopter, huddled together in the center of camp, no one spoke. The hand remained visible, the fingers occasionally twitching, as if Kimball was still alive beneath the sand, still trying to reach us. Dr. Liang forbade us from digging, from even approaching that dune. "The sand is too unstable," he said firmly. "You'll just sink yourself." But I saw the fear in his eyes. It wasn't quicksand he was worried about. The helicopter arrived just before sunset. As we lifted off, I pressed against the window, watching our camp recede. From above, I could suddenly see what had been invisible at ground level. Our new camp sat at the center of an enormous circular depression in the desert, like a giant footprint pressed into the earth, and stretched across the entire basin. Only visible from this height and angle were faint lines in the sand forming unmistakable words. "Come back." No one else seemed to notice. They stared straight ahead or at their laps, shells of the vibrant researchers they'd been just weeks earlier. Dr. Liang caught me looking at the message and shook his head slightly, finger to his lips. The debriefing was conducted by serious men and women in unmarked facilities. They asked the same questions repeatedly in different ways. Had we collected samples of the sand? Had we ingested any? Had we noticed any unusual dreams? Any missing time? They took blood, hair, skin scrapings. They confiscated all our equipment. When I mentioned the circling sounds, the scratching at the tents, they exchanged glances. "There's no evidence of any unidentified fauna in the region," a gray-haired woman said smoothly. "Desert hallucinations are common among unprepared visitors." "We were prepared," I argued, "and we all heard it." "Did you?" she asked, her pen poised above her notepad. "Because your colleagues have no recollection of these incidents." They showed me interview transcripts. Rivera, Johansson, even Dr. Liang, all denied hearing anything unusual, denied the missing time, denied the marks on their bodies, despite the fact that I could still see the circular burns on Rivera's arm as she sat across from me in the waiting area, now covered with a thin layer of concealer. They were lying, or they had forgotten. It remembers what we forget. After 2 days of questioning, they released us with non-disclosure agreements and carefully worded medical leave documents citing environmental stress and parasitic infection concerns. We were told not to contact each other. Research credit would still be awarded. Salaries would be paid out for the full expected duration of the expedition. I tried calling Rivera a week later. Her number was disconnected. Johansson's university profile now listed him as on sabbatical, return date undetermined. Dr. Liang's credentials had been scrubbed from his institution's website. I tried to move on. I found a new research position. I dated. I told myself the Namib incident was some kind of shared delusion brought on by desert conditions and isolation. But the headaches never stopped. And sometimes, I wake to find fine red sand in my bed, though I live thousands of miles from any desert. 3 months after our evacuation, a small package arrived at my apartment. No return address. Inside was a single USB drive. It contained one file, audio from Rivera's recorder, dated our last night in the desert. Based on the timestamp, it was recorded while the rest of us slept. Her voice comes first, shaking. "It's here again, inside the tent this time. Oh God, I can smell it, like ozone and rot." Silence. Then the wet tearing sound I remembered from my own recording. Rivera again, barely a whisper now. It says it's been waiting for someone to come back, that people always come back to the Namib, that the sand remembers us even when we forget ourselves. A pause, filled with her increasingly rapid breathing. It says it's chosen me, that I have the right consistency, right porosity, that I'll make an excellent. Her voice breaks. Vessel. The sound quality shifts then, as if the recorder has been picked up. Heavy breathing, but different from Rivera's. Deeper, rasping, not quite human. Then words, spoken in Rivera's voice but with all the wrong inflections, like something wearing her vocal cords without understanding how they should sound. "We are patient. We have been patient since before your kind walked upright. The sand remembers. The sand preserves. The sand reclaims. All things in time return to sand. A soft, rhythmic shuffling. The sound of circling. We will wait for you to return, and you will return. The sand has marked you. The sand remembers you. Even now, it grows within you grain by grain. Can you feel it? Behind your eyes? In your lungs? In the hollow spaces of your bones." The recording ends there. I've seen 4 specialists about the headaches. The last one found something unusual on the MRI. Tiny granular masses scattered throughout my brain tissue. Mineral deposits, he called them, puzzled. Like extremely fine sand. I've begun to feel a pulling sensation, like a compass needle seeking north, always in the same direction, toward the desert, toward the Namib. I find myself researching flights to Namibia in my sleep. Browser history filled with searches I don't remember making. Maps with routes carefully plotted. Last night, I woke to the sound of shuffling outside my bedroom door. Click slide, click slide, click slide. The familiar rhythm of something circling. But in the morning, there were no tracks. Just a faint dusting of red sand on my pillow, and the growing certainty that I am not alone in my skin anymore. The sand remembers what we forget, and it's calling me home. There was no record of the island ever existing, but the bones we found said otherwise. I've spent the last 3 years trying to make sense of what happened off the coast of Chile. Most nights, I wake up drenched in sweat, the sound of chittering still fresh in my ears. My therapist says I'm suffering from PTSD. Maybe she's right, but trauma from what exactly? From something that couldn't possibly exist? From something that defies every natural law we know? The Chilean locals call that stretch of coastline El Fin del Tiempo, the end of time. I thought it was just another colorful name designed to attract tourists like us. Now I know better. There were 5 of us on that kayaking expedition. Me, Vance, Eliza, Tomas, and Connor. Only 2 of us made it back, and I'm not sure if either of us truly escaped. It started with Vance's obsession with uncharted places. He'd been studying satellite anomalies off the Chilean coast for months before he convinced us to join him. Vance was that kind of guy, brilliant, persuasive, and just reckless enough to make terrible ideas sound exciting. The satellite imagery doesn't match the maritime charts, he'd explained, spreading maps across my kitchen table 6 months before we left. There's a shadow here, he pointed to a smudge of darkness on a printout. That doesn't appear on any official map, and look at the water patterns around it. I squinted at the swirling currents that seemed to circle the dark spot. They formed an unnatural spiral, as if the ocean itself was being pulled into a drain. Could be a glitch in the imaging, I suggested. For 3 separate satellites? Over a 5-year period. Vance shook his head. No way. Something's there, and no one's documenting it. I should have said no. We all should have. But the promise of discovering something genuinely new in this overmapped world was too tempting. And Vance had credentials, a PhD in marine geology and connections at 3 universities. If anyone could lead an expedition like this, it was him. So we planned. We trained. We gathered top-of-the-line kayaking gear and enough supplies for 2 weeks. We obtained permits for research along the Chilean coast, though we were deliberately vague about our exact destination. How could we list coordinates for a place that officially didn't exist? The morning we set out from the tiny fishing village of Puerto Oscuro was unnaturally still. The Pacific spread before us like polished obsidian, not a whisper of wind to disturb its surface. The local fishermen watched us load our kayaks with hollow eyes. One old man made the sign of the cross as we pushed off from shore. "Did you see that?" Eliza murmured, adjusting her life vest. "They're acting like we're heading to our deaths." "Superstition," Connor said, though his voice lacked conviction. These isolated communities develop their own folklore. Tomas, our guide and translator, looked uncomfortable. He was from Santiago, college-educated and skeptical, but something about the locals' behavior had gotten under his skin. "Did they say something to you?" I asked him. Tomas hesitated, dipping his paddle into the water. "Just old stories. Nothing important." "What kind of stories?" Vance pressed, his eyes gleaming with interest. "They say there's a place where the water flows backward," Tomas finally admitted. "Where the sun rises in the west. A place that God forgot." We laughed it off, the 5 of us. Scientific minds. Rational thinkers. We dismissed the warnings as colorful local mythology. For hours later, we noticed the birds had disappeared. The sky above us was empty. No gulls, no albatross, nothing but vast blue emptiness. The mainland had receded to a thin dark line on the horizon behind us, and ahead lay nothing but open ocean, except for the smudge, a dark spot on the horizon that shouldn't have been there. "There it is," Vance said, his voice hushed with reverence. "Exactly where the satellite showed it. The closer we got, the more wrong it looked. Not like an island should look. Islands have definition, shape, features. This was more like someone had taken an eraser to reality and smudged out a section of horizon. The edges seemed to blur and shift, as if we were viewing it through warped glass." "Ocean mirage," Connor suggested, though he didn't sound convinced. "Temperature differentials can create optical illusions, but mirages don't grow clearer as you approach. This one did. After another hour of paddling, we could see the outline of a shoreline. Rocky, jagged, with a dense mass of vegetation beyond. My arms ached from paddling, but I barely noticed. Something about the place pulled at me, a magnetic attraction that made each stroke of the paddle feel predestined. I wasn't choosing to go there anymore. I was being summoned. "Do you feel that?" Eliza whispered. She'd stopped paddling, her kayak drifting alongside mine. "Like a pressure?" I nodded, unable to find words for the sensation. It was like the air itself had thickened, pressing against my skin from all directions. The water around us had changed too. No longer clear Pacific blue, it had darkened to an inky black, and there was something wrong with the way it moved. Each ripple seemed a half-second off, as if the water was struggling to remember how to behave. "The current's shifting," Tomas called out, his voice tight with strain. "We're being pulled in." He was right. Despite not paddling, our kayaks were accelerating toward the island, caught in an invisible tow. Vance whooped with excitement, but I felt the first real tremor of fear. Nature doesn't behave this way. Currents don't suddenly change direction and intensify without cause. Wind doesn't stop dead. Birds don't vanish from the sky. But we were scientists, explorers. We'd come too far to turn back now. The beach where we landed wasn't sand, but a stretch of smooth, black pebbles that clicked together like teeth when the waves washed over them. The sound they made was almost musical, a discordant chiming that set my teeth on edge. "We made it," Vance said, staggering onto shore with his arms raised in triumph. "We're the first people to set foot on this place in who knows how long. But we weren't the first. We just didn't know it yet." We secured our kayaks well above the tide line and unloaded our gear. The plan was to set up a base camp on the beach, then explore the interior over the following days. Connor, our biologist, was already collecting samples of the vegetation that grew right up to the shoreline. Thick, ropey vines and bushes with leaves that seemed to throb with an unnatural glossiness. "Look at this," he called, gesturing toward a plant with broad, flat leaves. "I've never seen anything like it. The cellular structure is visible to the naked eye." I moved closer, squinting at the leaf he held out. He was right. I could see a network of cells pulsing beneath the waxy surface, like blood vessels beneath translucent skin. But the pattern was wrong. The cells weren't arranged in the symmetrical structure you'd expect. They shifted and rearranged themselves as we watched, like they were attempting to hide from our scrutiny. "That's not possible," I murmured. "None of this is possible," Connor replied, his scientific enthusiasm momentarily overshadowed by uncertainty. "An uncharted island with unique flora? In one of the most well-mapped regions of the Pacific? It doesn't add up." Eliza was setting up her equipment at the edge of our camp, seismographs and other instruments to measure the geological activity of the island. She frowned at the readings she was getting. "This is bizarre," she said. "According to this, the geological age of the rock we're standing on is, well, it's giving me a negative number." "Equipment malfunction," Vance suggested. "The magnetic field might be interfering." I looked up at the sky. The sun was beginning its descent toward the horizon, but something about its position seemed wrong. I checked my watch. 3:17 p.m. But the sun's angle suggested it was closer to morning than afternoon. A chill ran through me that had nothing to do with the temperature. "Let's establish camp and collect some preliminary samples," Vance said, either not noticing or choosing to ignore the growing unease among us. "We'll do a proper exploration tomorrow." We set up our tents in a semicircle facing the ocean. None of us wanted our backs to the dense vegetation that crept down almost to the tide line. As we worked, I kept glancing at that wall of green. It seemed to pulse and shift when viewed from the corner of my eye, but whenever I looked directly at it, it was perfectly still. Tomas was unusually quiet as we prepared a simple dinner over a portable stove. When I asked him what was wrong, he leaned close to me. "Listen," he whispered. I held my breath, straining my ears. At first, I heard nothing unusual, just the click, click, click of the pebbles as waves washed over them, the soft hiss of our camp stove, the rustle of the strange vegetation behind us. But then I heard it, or rather, I heard what wasn't there. "No insects," I said, realization dawning.
No birds.
"No animal sounds at all." Tomas nodded grimly. "Islands are usually teeming with life. The noise never stops. But here, it's dead silent," I finished. As if in response to my words, a sound rose from the interior of the island. A low, thrumming hum that seemed to vibrate through the ground and into our bones. It wasn't mechanical, it was too organic, too variable. It rose and fell like breathing. "What the hell is that?" Connor asked, his face pale in the fading light. "Probably just wind moving through the rock formations," Vance said, but his voice lacked conviction. None of us believed it was the wind. Wind doesn't sound like a massive, sleeping creature shifting in its slumber. Night fell with unnatural swiftness, as if someone had thrown a switch. One moment the sky was dim with twilight. The next it was pitch black. The stars that appeared overhead were wrong too, constellations in impossible arrangements, stars that pulsed and flickered like they were communicating in some cosmic Morse code. We lit our lamps and huddled closer together, the camaraderie of scientific inquiry giving way to the more primal comfort of human proximity in the dark. No one suggested exploring further that night. No one wanted to leave the relative safety of our camp. We took turns keeping watch, though none of us explicitly said what we were watching for. I took the first shift, sitting with my back to the dying embers of our cooking fire, staring out at the wall of vegetation that seemed to have crept closer since we'd set up camp. The others drifted off to their tents one by one, until only Eliza remained with me. "Something's wrong with this place," she said softly, wrapping her arms around her knees. "The readings I'm getting, they don't make any sense. It's like the island isn't just uncharted. It's impossible. We'll figure it out tomorrow," I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. "Everything seems stranger in the dark." She nodded and retreated to her tent, leaving me alone with the night. The hours crept by with excruciating slowness. I checked my watch repeatedly, but the hands seemed to move at an inconsistent pace, sometimes racing forward, sometimes barely advancing at all. When Tomas came to relieve me at what my watch claimed was midnight, I was grateful for the chance to escape into the oblivion of sleep. But sleep brought no relief. I dreamed of bones, countless bones, bleached white by sun and time, arranged in a vast spiral pattern that covered the entire island. In the center of the spiral sat a creature I couldn't quite see, just a suggestion of limbs that moved wrong, of appendages that twisted in ways that defied anatomy. I woke gasping, my body rigid with fear. The quality of light filtering through my tent was wrong. Too blue, too diffuse. I fumbled for my watch.
6:30 Uhr morgens.
I should have been relieved, but that strange light made my skin crawl. Outside, Connor was already up, crouched at the edge of our camp with his sample collection gear. "Did you see it?" he asked without looking up. "The sunrise." "No," I said, rubbing sleep from my eyes. "What about it?" "It came from the wrong direction." His voice was eerily calm, the voice of a man trying very hard to rationalize the irrational. "It rose from the west." I checked my compass 3 times. I stared at him, then at the sun now climbing higher in the sky. "That's not possible." "Neither is this." He held up a leaf he'd collected the previous day. It had been green, vibrant when he'd stored it in his sample case. Now it was a translucent, jellified mass that quivered in the morning air. I took an involuntary step back. What happened to it? It's young, Connor said, his scientific detachment cracking. Impossibly young, like it's moving backward in time, from mature leaf to embryonic state. Before I could process what he was saying, a shout came from the direction of the beach. Vance stood at the water's edge, waving frantically for us to join him. "The kayaks," he called, his voice cracking with strain. "They're gone." We stood in a line at the edge of the water, staring at the empty stretch of beach where our kayaks had been secured the night before. The ropes we'd used to tie them down lay in the exact configuration we'd left them, perfect circles on the smooth pebbles. But the kayaks themselves had vanished. Could they have been dragged out by the tide? Eliza suggested, though we all knew it was impossible. We'd secured them well above the high water mark, and the ropes showed no signs of being dragged or disturbed. "They didn't go anywhere," Tomas said, his voice hollow. "It's like they were never here at all." But they had been. Our gear was still piled where we'd left it, the indentations of the kayaks still visible in the pebbles. It was as if some cosmic editor had selectively erased them from existence. "We need to focus," Vance said, running his hands through his hair. "We have the satellite phone. We can call for extraction." The satellite phone, of course. Relief washed over me, followed immediately by a new wave of dread. If the island could make our kayaks disappear, what else might it do? Vance retrieved the phone from his gear and powered it on. We gathered around as he attempted to connect to the satellite network. The display showed searching for signal, then no signal found. He tried again, and again. "It was working fine yesterday," he muttered, a note of desperation creeping into his voice. "I checked it before we left the mainland." But that had been in the normal world. The world where the sun rose in the east and plants didn't regress to embryonic states overnight. "We need to explore more of the island," Vance decided, slipping into leader mode. "Find higher ground. Maybe we'll get a signal there." None of us wanted to venture further into the island's interior, but we had no choice. With our primary means of escape gone, the satellite phone was our only link to the outside world. We gathered essential supplies into our day packs, water, energy bars, first aid kit, Vance's satellite phone, Connor's sample collection gear, Eliza's handheld geological scanners, and my camera. Tomas brought a machete, though the vegetation didn't look dense enough to require it. I think he just wanted something that could double as a weapon. "We'll mark our trail," Vance said, pulling a roll of bright orange surveyor's tape from his pack. "Tie pieces to trees or rocks every 20 meters or so. That way we can find our way back to camp." It was a sound plan, one we'd used on countless expeditions before. But as we headed into the interior, leaving the relative safety of the beach behind, I couldn't shake the feeling that conventional precautions would be useless here. This island didn't play by the rules we understood. The vegetation grew thicker as we moved inland, but it wasn't the impenetrable jungle I'd expected. Instead, it was more like walking through a garden designed by someone with a fundamentally warped understanding of plant life. The trees curved and bent at impossible angles, their trunks spiraling upward as if they were trying to unscrew themselves from the ground. The underbrush pulsed with a veiny network of roots that seemed to retreat from our footsteps, only to surge back into place behind us. "Look at this," Connor said, pointing to what appeared to be fruit hanging from a low branch. They were perfect spheres, glistening with a thick, clear sap that dripped slowly onto the ground below. "I've never seen anything like it." He reached out to touch one, but Tomas grabbed his wrist. "Don't," Tomas warned. "There's something wrong with this place. We shouldn't touch anything we don't have to." Connor looked like he wanted to argue, but then one of the fruit-like objects split open with a wet, sucking sound. Inside was not pulp or seeds, but something that looked disturbingly like tiny, translucent fingers, reaching outward as if seeking contact. We backed away as one, our scientific curiosity overwhelmed by instinctive revulsion. "Let's keep moving," Vance said, his voice tight. "We need to get to higher ground." The terrain began to slope upward, the ground beneath our feet changing from soil to a strange, almost metallic black rock that rang faintly when struck. The sound echoed longer than it should have, as if the island itself was hollow beneath us. After an hour of climbing, we emerged from the twisted vegetation onto a plateau of the same black stone. From here, we could see much of the island, a roughly circular mass of land about 3 miles in diameter, with our beach to the east and a sheer cliff face dropping into the ocean on the western side. But it was what lay at the center of the plateau that stopped us in our tracks. Bones. Hundreds, maybe thousands of bones, bleached white and arranged in a vast spiral pattern. Exactly as I'd seen in my dream. Human bones, animal bones, and others I couldn't identify, too large, too strangely shaped to belong to any creature I recognized. "What the hell is this?" Eliza whispered, her voice barely audible over the wind that had begun to pick up, whistling through the bone maze with an eerie, almost musical quality. Vance moved forward as if in a trance, his eyes fixed on the center of the spiral. "It's a pattern, a message, maybe, or some kind of ritual site. We need to go back," Tomas urged, gripping the machete tightly. "Now." But Vance was already walking toward the spiral, drawn forward by the same invisible pull that had guided our kayaks to the island. I followed, not because I wanted to, but because some perverse instinct told me it was more dangerous to be separated. The bones crunched beneath our feet as we moved deeper into the spiral. Some were ancient, crumbling to dust at the slightest touch. Others looked fresher, still bearing traces of sinew and cartilage. I tried not to think about what that meant. "There's writing," Connor called out, pointing to a large, flat bone, possibly a whale's scapula, that lay at one of the spiral's turns. Scratched into its surface were symbols I'd never seen before, yet somehow seemed familiar, as if they were letters from a language I'd once known but had forgotten. Vance ran his fingers over the markings, his eyes wide with excitement. "This is incredible. Proof of human habitation. Or something that can write. Something that can write using human bones," Tomas muttered, making the sign of the cross again. As we moved deeper into the spiral, the air grew heavier, charged with a static electricity that made the hairs on my arms stand on end. The sky above us had darkened to a deep, unnatural purple, though my watch insisted it was only midday. At the center of the spiral was a circular clearing about 20 feet in diameter. The ground here wasn't stone but a reflective black surface that rippled slightly, like mercury. And in the middle of this pool stood a stone column covered in the same strange symbols we'd seen on the bone. Vance approached it, his scientific caution apparently abandoned. "This is what we came for. Proof of something beyond our understanding." "Vance, wait," I started, but it was too late. He placed his hand on the column, and the symbols began to glow with a pale blue light. The black pool beneath our feet shuddered, then began to swirl, slowly at first, then faster, creating a vortex that pulled at our feet. "What's happening?" Eliza cried, stumbling backward. The sky above us split open with a sound like tearing fabric. Through the rent, I caught a glimpse of something. Not stars, not clouds, but a churning mass of shapes and colors that hurt my eyes to look at directly. "We need to go," Tomas shouted over the growing roar of the vortex. "Now!" But Vance stood transfixed, his hand still pressed to the column, his eyes wide and unseeing. The blue light had spread from the symbols to his fingers, then up his arm, crawling over his skin like luminescent veins. "It's beautiful," he whispered, though I could barely hear him over the cacophony. "It's showing me everything." Connor grabbed Vance's shoulder, trying to pull him away from the column. "Vance, we have to leave." But when Vance turned to look at us, his eyes were wrong. No longer human but pools of the same swirling black as the ground beneath our feet. And his smile stretched too wide across his face, revealing teeth that seemed to be growing longer, sharper as we watched. "You don't understand," he said, and his voice was layered with other voices, echoing beneath his own. "Time moves differently here, backward, forward, sideways. They've been waiting for so long." "Who's been waiting?" I demanded, though some part of me already knew the answer, already understood the horror of what was unfolding. The ones who were here before, Vance replied, gesturing toward the tear in the sky. The ones who will be here after. The ones who exist in the spaces between moments. As he spoke, something began to emerge from the rent in the sky. Long, segmented limbs like those of a massive insect, reaching down toward us. The air filled with a chittering sound that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. "Run!" Tomas screamed, grabbing Eliza's arm and pulling her toward the edge of the spiral. Connor and I followed, but Vance stayed where he was, his arms now outstretched in welcome to the thing that was forcing its way through from somewhere else. The last glimpse I had of Vance was of his body beginning to unravel, his flesh separating into long, ribbon-like strands that rose up to meet the descending limbs. We fled through the bone spiral, no longer concerned with scientific observation or sample collection. Pure animal terror drove us forward, even as the ground beneath our feet began to liquefy, the bones sinking into the suddenly viscous stone. "The beach!" Connor gasped as we reached the edge of the plateau. "If we can get to the beach, maybe." Piercing scream cut him off. Eliza had fallen behind, and when we turned back, we saw her being pulled back toward the center of the spiral by what looked like a tide of bones, thousands of them, flowing together like a living river of calcified matter. Tomas ran back toward her, slashing at the advancing tide with his machete. For a moment, I thought he might succeed in freeing her. But then the bones surged upward, forming a wave that crashed over both of them. When the wave receded, neither Tomas nor Eliza was visible. In their place was a new arrangement of bones, already beginning to bleach white under the unnatural purple sky. Connor and I didn't stop to mourn. We couldn't. The entire island seemed to be coming alive around us, the vegetation writhing with a purpose that had nothing to do with natural growth, the ground beneath our feet swelling and contracting like the surface of a giant lung. We ran blindly, following the surveyor's tape markers back toward the beach. But the markers led us in circles, or to dead ends where massive sinkholes had opened up in the ground, revealing glimpses of vast, cavernous spaces below. "The island's rearranging itself," Connor panted as we skidded to a halt at the edge of one such pit. "It's trying to keep us here." "Why?" I gasped, though I already suspected the answer. The bones we'd seen hadn't arranged themselves. They were remains, trophies, perhaps, or raw materials. "Because it's hungry," Connor replied, his voice hollow. "Or they are. Whatever's coming through that tear in the sky." We found another path, one that seemed to lead downward, toward what we hoped was the shore. The vegetation was thicker here, the strange, pulsating plants closing in around us, their tendrils reaching for our ankles as we passed. A rhythmic booming sound echoed through the island, like the footsteps of something massive. The chittering I'd heard earlier grew louder, now accompanied by a high-pitched keening that made my teeth ache. "We're not going to make it," Connor said, his voice surprisingly calm. He'd stopped running, standing strangely still amidst the undulating vegetation. "Don't say that," I urged, grabbing his arm. "We're close. I can smell the ocean." But Connor's face had gone slack, his eyes fixed on something behind me. "Look," he whispered. I turned, and what I saw defied description. It was as if reality itself had folded, creating a pocket in the air from which something was emerging. Not the insect-like limbs I'd seen earlier, but something worse. Something that seemed to be composed of angles and dimensions that shouldn't exist, that hurt my mind to look at directly. It was beautiful in a terrible way, like gazing into an abyss and having the abyss not only gaze back, but reach out to caress your face with fingers made of pure contradiction. Connor stepped toward it, his expression one of horrified fascination. "I understand now," he murmured. "It's not just an island. It's a gateway, a meeting point between... He never finished the sentence. The thing, if it could be called a thing, enveloped him, not by moving forward but by somehow being where Connor was, occupying the same space at the same time. Connor didn't scream. He simply ceased to be Connor. One moment he was there. The next, something wearing a shape that approximated Connor stood in his place. It turned toward me, and its face was like looking at a reflection in water that had been disturbed by a stone. Recognizable but fundamentally wrong. "Run," it said, using Connor's voice but with an inflection that was utterly alien. "We are not ready for you yet." I ran, not out of courage or quick thinking, but from pure, mindless terror. I ran until my lungs burned and my legs threatened to give out beneath me. I ran until the vegetation thinned and I found myself staggering onto the black pebble beach where we'd first landed. Our camp was gone. The tents, the equipment, all of it vanished as if it had never been. But at the water's edge sat a single kayak, mine, somehow restored to existence. I didn't question it. I dragged the kayak into the water and threw myself into the seat, paddling with desperate strength. The island behind me seemed to be collapsing in on itself, the unnatural purple sky swirling into a vortex centered on the bone spiral. The current fought me, trying to pull me back toward the shore. But I paddled with the strength of pure fear, and eventually, I broke free of the island's pull. As I put distance between myself and that accursed place, I looked back. The island was changing, shrinking, or perhaps folding in on itself. The tear in the sky had grown larger, and through it poured a stream of those chittering, insectal creatures I'd glimpsed earlier. They swarmed over the island, their movements creating patterns that hurt my eyes to follow. Then, between one blink and the next, the island was gone. Not sunk beneath the waves, not hidden by distance or mist, but simply gone, as if it had never existed. The sky above where it had been was normal again, blue and clear. The ocean surface was placid, showing no sign of the vortex that had tried to drag me back. I sat in my kayak, floating on the gentle Pacific swell, alone in a world that suddenly seemed far more vast and terrifying than I had ever imagined. 3 days later, a Chilean fishing boat found me, delirious from dehydration and exposure. I'd been drifting without direction, my mind unable to process what I'd seen, what I'd escaped from. I told them about the island, about my lost companions. They searched the area for days but found nothing. No island, no wreckage, no bodies. According to all charts and GPS readings, there was nothing but open ocean for miles in every direction. The authorities concluded that our group had been caught in a storm. Our kayaks separated. My friends were presumed dead, lost at sea. I was the lucky one, the survivor who'd clung to his kayak until rescue arrived. But I know what I saw. I know what happened to Vance, to Eliza, to Tomas, to Connor. They're not dead, not in the way we understand death. They're elsewhere, part of the island that isn't there, part of the thing that came through the tear in the sky. The dreams started soon after I returned home. Dreams of bones arranged in spiral patterns. Dreams of chittering voices calling my name from behind thin membranes of reality. Dreams of Connor's face, distorted and wrong, telling me they're not ready for me yet. But someday they will be. And when that day comes, I wonder if I'll find myself back on that beach of clicking pebbles, staring up at a sky that tears open to reveal the spaces between moments. There was no record of the island ever existing, but the bones we found said otherwise. And sometimes, in the darkness of my room, I can feel my own bones shifting, rearranging themselves into patterns I don't understand, preparing for what's coming, for what's always been coming, for what's been here all along. The tent was zipped shut from the inside, but what we found inside had no skin. That's the part nobody believes. How could it have been closed from within? How could there be no signs of struggle, no tears in the fabric, no blood? Just a perfect, untouched dome of nylon against the snow, and inside, the thing that used to be James. The authorities wrote it off as exposure and delirium. Extreme frostbite, they said, followed by self-mutilation due to hypothermia-induced psychosis. They had their neat explanations, their paperwork, their desire to avoid thinking too hard about what we found. They weren't there. They didn't see what I saw. They didn't hear the sounds that still wake me at night, the wet slithering like something being born. That was 4 months ago. Now I sit in my apartment with the heat cranked to 85, sweating constantly, unable to tolerate even the slightest chill. I've been diagnosed with PTSD. My doctor says my fear of cold is psychosomatic. Maybe he's right, but he doesn't know what lives in the cold. Let me tell you what happened at Great Slave Lake last January. I never wanted to go winter camping in the Northwest Territories. Lisa was the outdoors enthusiast. She'd spent 3 summers as a wilderness guide and had been trying to get me to experience true winter for years. I preferred my adventures in more temperate seasons, but when Becca and James joined in the chorus of persuasion, I finally relented. The northern lights in winter are something else entirely, Lisa had said, her eyes glinting with that fervor she always got when talking about the wilderness. And the silence, you've never heard silence like it. She was right about the silence, but not in the way she meant. We flew into Yellowknife on January 12th. The thermometer at the small airport read -22 degrees Fahrenheit, and that wasn't counting wind chill. I remember the way the cold hit me when I stepped off the plane, not as a sensation but as an absence, as if some vital part of me had been suddenly extracted. My lungs seized at the first breath. Jesus Christ, I gasped, the words crystallizing in front of my face. James laughed, clapping me on the back. Welcome to the real North, buddy. James was a geologist who'd worked oil exploration in Alaska. The cold didn't faze him. Nothing much did. He had that kind of unflappable confidence that made him the natural leader of our little expedition, even though Lisa had more backcountry experience. Becca, his girlfriend of 8 months, worked in finance and was relatively new to our friend group, but she'd grown up in Minnesota and knew her way around winter. We spent 2 days in Yellowknife gathering supplies, finalizing our route, and checking in with the local ranger station. We filed our trip plan, a 5-day circuit around a remote section of Great Slave Lake, and rented a truck to take us to our starting point, a small outfitter's cabin about 40 miles northeast of the city. The old man who ran the outfitting service, Abraham, he called himself, kept giving us strange looks as he helped load our gear. Not many folks come out here this time of year, he said, his weathered face impassive beneath a fur-lined hood. Especially not to that area. That's why we're going, Lisa replied brightly.
No crowds, pristine wilderness.
Abraham nodded slowly. The Dean don't go there in winter. Not since the old days. The who? I asked. Dean. Local indigenous folks. James explained, then turned to Abraham. Why don't they go there? Abraham paused in his work, a coil of rope in his gnarled hands. Old stories. Nothing to worry about if you keep to the marked trails and don't disturb things that should be left alone. What things? Becca asked, suddenly interested. The old man shrugged. Just an expression. You city folks be careful out there. Weather can change quick, and help is far away. I wanted to press him further, but James was already steering the conversation toward practical matters about our route. I remember thinking Abraham seemed relieved to move on from the subject. That night in our motel, I searched online for Dean legends about Great Slave Lake. Most were creation stories or tales about animals, but buried in a poorly scanned PDF from a local historical society, I found a brief mention of something called the Winter Skin Taker or the One Who Wears Others. The translation was uncertain, and the account fragmentary. Just a warning not to camp near ice cracks during the deep winter moon. The article concluded that it was likely a practical warning against thin ice, embellished over generations into a monster story. I showed it to the others at breakfast. Classic indigenous folklore, James said, sipping his coffee. Practical survival knowledge wrapped in metaphor. Don't mess with ice cracks or you'll fall through and die. I don't know, Lisa said, scrolling through the article on my phone. Some of these details are specific, like this part about it being attracted to warmth and breath. That's just ice fishing, James replied. Your breath melts the ice. Obviously dangerous. Becca leaned over to look at the screen. What's this part about? It leaves the empty vessels behind. Hypothermia victims, James explained confidently. They sometimes undress before they die. Paradoxical undressing, it's called. The body gets confused as it shuts down. His explanations made sense, but I remember feeling a nagging unease. James had an answer for everything, which was both reassuring and somehow disturbing, like he'd decided on the shape of the world and wouldn't consider alternatives. We set out the next morning, driving 2 hours on increasingly remote roads until we reached the trailhead. Abraham helped us unload our gear in silence, his eyes constantly scanning the tree line. Before he left, he pressed something into my hand, a small leather pouch on a cord. "What's this?" I asked. "Old protection," he said quietly. "My grandmother made these. Keep it close." I started to thank him, but he was already walking back to his truck. As he pulled away, he called out, "Stay away from the black ice. If you see it, go the other way." "What's black ice?" I asked Lisa as we shouldered our packs. "Just regular ice that looks dark because there's no air bubbles," she said. "It's actually the strongest kind." Not sure why he'd warn us away from it. James snorted. "Superstition. Let's move. We've got 6 miles to cover before making camp." The first day's hike was grueling but uneventful. The cold was profound, different from anything I'd experienced, but our gear was top quality, and the physical exertion kept us warm. The landscape was stark and beautiful. Pristine snow, massive pines, and the vast frozen expanse of the lake stretching away to the horizon. We made camp just before sunset, pitching our 2 tents, James and Becca in one, Lisa and I in the other, in a small clearing sheltered by trees. After setting up, James got a fire going, and we huddled around it drinking hot chocolate laced with whiskey. "See,
Lisa not get me.
isn't this amazing?" It was. The stars blazed overhead with an intensity I'd never seen before, and the silence was profound. Not the absence of sound, but a presence in itself, as if the cold had substance and weight. That night, I slept surprisingly well, exhausted from the day's hike. I woke only once, around 3 a.m., to the sound of something moving outside. Probably just an animal, I thought drowsily, before drifting back to sleep. The second day took us farther around the lake's perimeter. The temperature dropped further, and the wind picked up, driving ice crystals that stung any exposed skin. Around midday, we came across something unusual. A perfect circle of bare ground in the snow, about 12 feet in diameter. "That's weird," Becca said, crouching at its edge. "It's like the snow melted perfectly just in this spot." "But there's no water," Lisa observed. "If it melted, where's the slush?" James knelt and touched the exposed earth. "It's not even damp, and it's warm." I hung back, remembering Abraham's warnings. "Maybe we should go around." "It's just a geological anomaly," James said dismissively. "Probably a hot spring vent or something. I've seen these before." "In the middle of winter? On solid ground?" Lisa sounded skeptical. "You got a better explanation?" James challenged. No one did, so we skirted the circle and continued hiking. But I noticed James taking samples of the soil and pocketing them. That afternoon, we reached a spectacular viewpoint overlooking the frozen lake. As we stood admiring the vista, I noticed something odd about the ice below us. "What's that?" I pointed to a dark patch about half a mile from shore. Lisa pulled out binoculars. "Looks like a section of black ice. Must be what Abraham was talking about." The patch was perfectly oval, perhaps 100 yards across, standing out starkly against the snow-covered ice surrounding it. "We should avoid that area," I said, thinking of Abraham's warning. James took the binoculars. "Interesting formation. I'd like to get a closer look." "The old man specifically said to stay away from black ice," I reminded him. "He's just a superstitious old-timer," James said. "Besides, like Lisa said, black ice is stronger than regular ice. It's perfectly safe." "That's not what I said," Lisa interjected. "I said that's what black ice normally is. That doesn't look normal." A brief argument ensued, but James eventually conceded that we should stick to our planned route, which would take us away from the strange ice formation. We made camp that evening in another sheltered clearing. After dinner, James pulled out the soil samples from the snow circle. "Look at this," he said, showing us a plastic bag containing dark earth that seemed to shimmer slightly in the firelight. "What am I looking at?" I asked. "I'm not sure," he admitted. But it's not regular soil. There's something crystalline mixed in. Later, in our tent, Lisa confessed she was worried about James. He's been acting weird since we found that circle, she whispered. Did you notice he kept looking toward the lake during dinner? Toward that black ice patch? I had noticed. He's just curious. You know how he gets about geological oddities. Maybe, she said, but she didn't sound convinced. That night, I dreamed of ice that breathed. In the dream, I was lying on the surface of the frozen lake, and beneath me, I could feel something massive inhaling and exhaling, the ice rising and falling like a chest. When I woke, my sleeping bag was damp with sweat despite the freezing temperature. Lisa was already awake, staring at the tent ceiling. Did you hear anything last night? She asked.
No.
Why? I heard slithering, like something dragging itself through the snow around our tent. Before I could respond, we heard James calling from outside. Guys, you've got to see this. We dressed quickly and emerged into the bright morning. James was standing at the edge of our campsite, pointing excitedly at the ground. Look at these tracks. We gathered around. In the snow was a bizarre trail, not animal prints, but a wide, continuous depression, as if something heavy had been dragged in a sinuous path through the camp. What made this? Becca asked, her voice hushed. I have no idea, James said, his eyes bright with excitement. Nothing I've ever seen before. It goes around both tents, Lisa observed, like it was circling us. I felt a cold that had nothing to do with the temperature. Where does it lead? We followed the track to the edge of the trees, where it simply stopped, or rather, continued up the trunk of a large pine. The bark distorted and partially melted as if exposed to intense heat. This doesn't make sense, Lisa said. It's fascinating, James countered. A completely unknown phenomenon. It's not fascinating, it's fucked up, I said. We should pack up and head back. James looked at me like I'd suggested we sprout wings and fly. Are you kidding? We're witnessing something potentially groundbreaking here. James, Becca said softly, putting a hand on his arm. Maybe he's right. This is creepy. It's just nature, James insisted. Weird, unexplained nature, but still nature. Besides, I had another idea. The black ice isn't far from here, maybe 2 miles. We should check it out. Absolutely not, Lisa said firmly. We're sticking to the plan. James glared at her but didn't argue further. As we broke camp, I noticed him pocketing more samples. Bark from the tree, scrapings from the depression in the snow. We hiked in tense silence that morning. Our planned route naturally took us away from the lake, up into gently rolling, forested hills. Around noon, I realized James was no longer in front of me. I called out to Lisa, who was leading. Where's James? She turned, scanning the trail behind us. He was right behind Becca a minute ago. Becca looked horrified. I thought he was behind you. We backtracked, calling his name. About a quarter-mile back, we found his backpack abandoned on the trail, his snowshoes neatly placed beside it. Why would he leave his gear? Becca was frantic now. I picked up his pack. It was remarkably light. He emptied it, I said, opening the main compartment. Nothing inside except a water bottle and his sleeping bag. Lisa spotted it first. A set of boot prints leading off the trail, heading directly east, toward the lake, toward the black ice. He's making a run for it, I said, going to check out that ice patch. We have to go after him, Becca insisted. Lisa nodded grimly. He's going to get himself killed. We followed his tracks through the forest. He'd made no attempt to hide his trail, trampling straight through underbrush, making a beeline for the lake. After nearly an hour of hard tracking, we emerged from the trees onto the lake shore. His footprints continued out onto the ice. He's actually doing it, Lisa said in disbelief. He's heading straight for the black patch. We could see it in the distance, the oval of dark, clear ice, now seeming even larger than before, and a small figure walking toward it. James! Becca screamed. The figure stopped, turned. Even from a distance, I could see him wave, a casual come-join-me gesture. Then he continued walking. "We have to stop him," Becca said, starting forward. Lisa grabbed her arm. "Wait, the ice might not be safe for all of us." "I'll go," I said. "You two stay here and be ready to, I don't know, get help somehow." I stepped onto the ice, testing my weight before proceeding. It was solid, at least near the shore. I began making my way toward James, who had covered nearly half the distance to the black patch. The ice beneath my feet was an eerie, translucent blue, with occasional cracks and bubbles suspended in its depths. As I got further from shore, I began to hear it, soft creaks and groans as it shifted imperceptibly beneath me. Each sound sent a jolt of adrenaline through my system. I was perhaps a quarter of the way to James when he reached the edge of the black ice. He stopped, and even from 200 yards away, I could see him kneel down to examine it. I called out, my voice swallowed by the vast emptiness around us. "James, get back here." He didn't respond. Instead, he stepped onto the dark surface and walked toward its center. I increased my pace, still keeping my steps careful on the treacherous surface. I was about 100 yards from the black ice when James reached the center of the patch. He stood motionless for a moment, then dropped to his knees. Even at that distance, his posture communicated astonishment. He was looking down into the ice. I stopped. Something was wrong, not just with James's behavior, but with the ice itself. The dark patch didn't reflect the sunlight like normal ice should. It absorbed it like a hole in the world. James suddenly stood up and began waving frantically at me, not inviting me forward anymore, warning me back. He turned to run, but after 2 steps, he stopped abruptly, as if encountering an invisible wall. And then he began to sink, not like someone falling through broken ice. There was no splash, no crack. He was being pulled down, smoothly and steadily, as if the solid surface had become liquid just for him. He thrashed and fought, but half his body was already submerged in what should have been solid ice. I started running toward him, caution forgotten. I heard Lisa screaming from the shore, but the sound seemed to come from very far away. 20 yards from the edge of the black ice, my foot broke through. Frigid water engulfed my leg up to the knee, shocking me into immobility. I looked up just in time to see James's fingertips, the last visible part of him, slip beneath the dark surface. The black ice rippled once, like disturbed water, then became still and solid looking once more. I dragged my trapped leg free and retreated, half crawling, half stumbling back toward shore. By the time I reached Lisa and Becca, hypothermia was setting in, my soaked leg nearly numb. "Where is he?" Becca demanded, her eyes wild. "Where's James?" I couldn't answer. What could I possibly say? Lisa took charge. "We need to get you warmed up right now. Then we call for emergency rescue." She and Becca helped me back to the trees, where we quickly started a fire. As they cut away my pant leg and began warming my foot, I told them what I'd seen. Neither spoke. Becca stared into the fire, her face blank with shock. Using our satellite phone, Lisa called for emergency services. She explained that our friend had fallen through the ice, carefully describing our location. Help would come, but not for hours. Night fell as we waited, huddled around the fire. None of us wanted to set up the tents. Somehow, the open firelight felt safer. "Look," Lisa whispered, pointing out at the lake. The black patch was moving, slowly contracting like a pupil adjusting to light. As we watched, it shrank from a 100-yard oval to perhaps half that size. "That's not possible," I said. "None of this is possible," Lisa replied. Around midnight, with rescue still hours away, Becca stood up. "I'm going out there," she announced. "Are you insane?" I grabbed her arm. "You saw what happened to James." "Exactly. He might still be alive under there, trapped in an air pocket or something." "Becca, no one could survive." "You don't know that," she shouted, pulling away from me. "You didn't even try to save him." The accusation stung, but I held firm. "If you go out there, you'll die too." "She's right," Lisa said to Becca. "We need to wait for the rescue team." They'll have proper equipment. Becca glared at us both, then sank back down by the fire. If he dies because we waited, I'll never forgive either of you. None of us slept. We fed the fire and watched the black patch on the ice, which had stopped shrinking but occasionally seemed to pulse, though that might have been a trick of the firelight on my exhausted eyes. Dawn broke, gray and forbidding. The temperature had dropped further overnight, and the wind carved through our layers of clothing. The satellite phone rang. The rescue helicopter was delayed due to weather. Another 6 hours at least. We can't just sit here, Becca said, standing again. Her face was haggard, her eyes red-rimmed. We're not going on the ice, I said firmly.
No.
But we need shelter. Real shelter. I'm freezing to death sitting here. She was right. Despite the fire, we were all shivering constantly. We have the emergency tent in my pack, Lisa said. It's small, but it's insulated. We set up the small shelter, a bright orange dome designed for alpine emergencies. It was cramped with 3 of us, but the body heat and protection from wind made an immediate difference. That's when Becca found it in her pocket, the soil sample James had collected from the strange circle. She held the plastic bag up, examining the dark earth with its strange, glittering components. He must have slipped it to me yesterday, she said. Before she trailed off. Lisa took the bag, unsealing it carefully. Smells weird, like ozone. I remembered Abraham's warning about things that should be left alone and felt a fresh wave of unease. We should get rid of it, I said. Lisa nodded and was about to reseal the bag when Becca stopped her. Wait, look. The soil was moving, not settling or shifting, but actively writhing, the crystalline particles separating from the earth and clustering together like iron filings around a magnet. What the hell? Lisa whispered. Becca reached for the bag. James was right. This is incredible. Don't touch it. I knocked her hand away, causing Lisa to drop the bag. It fell onto the tent floor, spilling open. The substance. I couldn't think of it as soil anymore. Quivered, then began moving deliberately toward the tent wall facing the lake. It left a glistening trail, like a slug's path. Get out, I said, already fumbling for the tent zipper. Get out now. We burst from the tent into the bitter cold. Behind us, the orange fabric began to distort where the substance touched it, melting and puckering. What the actual fuck? Lisa gasped. We backed away, watching in horror as the material continued to deform. Then the tent collapsed entirely, as if suddenly empty of the rigid poles that supported it. But it wasn't empty. Something was moving inside. Run, I said, my voice a croak. We ran back toward the trees, toward our abandoned campfire. Behind us, the tent zipper opened from the inside with an obscene, drawn-out sound. Couldn't help it. I looked back. What emerged was only vaguely human-shaped, a glistening, translucent thing that seemed to be made of the same black ice from the lake. It stood on 2 leg-like appendages, swaying slightly. Where a face should be was only a smooth, reflective surface that distorted like rippling water. And then it shed its skin, the tent material sliding off it like a discarded garment, pooling at its feet. It began moving toward us, not walking but flowing, each step leaving a momentary impression in the snow that quickly hardened to glossy black. Lisa grabbed a burning branch from the fire and held it out like a weapon. The creature hesitated. It doesn't like heat, I realized aloud. The fire keeps it back. Becca wasn't looking at the creature. She was staring past it at the lake. Oh my God, she whispered. I followed her gaze. The black patch was gone entirely, and walking toward us across the normal ice was James. Except it couldn't be James. We'd seen him pulled under. Nevertheless, there he was, moving with James's characteristic confident stride, dressed in James's clothes, James's face wearing a broad smile. Hey guys, he called, his voice perfectly normal. Sorry for the scare. The ice was thick enough after all. I found something amazing down there. Becca took a step forward. James, stay back, Lisa warned, still brandishing the burning branch. That's not James. Of course it's me. Not James said, looking wounded. Who else would it be? He was closer now, close enough that I could see something was wrong with his face. The proportions were slightly off, the expressions just a beat too slow, as if someone was puppeteering his features from within. Where were you? I demanded. You went under the ice. We saw you. I found a passage, he said smoothly. An air pocket under the ice, then a tunnel leading back to shore. I got a little turned around. That's why it took me so long to find you. He held out his arms to Becca.
I'm freezing.
Come warm me up. She hesitated, then started toward him. Becca, don't, Lisa pleaded. Not James's smile widened. Too wide, stretching beyond the natural limits of a human face. It's okay, he said, his voice suddenly different, deeper and somehow wet. I'm just cold, so very cold. And then his face rippled, like the surface of disturbed water. Becca stopped, her expression changing from hope to horror. Not James took another step forward, and his hand reached up to touch his own cheek. With a casual movement, he pinched his skin between thumb and forefinger and pulled. The face split along an invisible seam, peeling back like a wetsuit hood to reveal the same glossy, reflective surface as the creature that had emerged from the tent. It continued pulling, the skin of the neck and torso coming away in one continuous piece. Lisa shoved the burning branch directly at the thing. It recoiled with a sound like steam escaping, a high, thin whistle that hurt my ears. Back to the fire, she ordered. Now! We retreated, Lisa keeping the creature at bay with the flaming branch. The thing that had been wearing James's form circled us like a predator, always staying just outside the radius of firelight. What do we do? Becca asked, her voice shaking. Before either of us could answer, we heard the distant thrum of helicopter blades. The rescue team was coming. The creature heard it too. It retreated several yards, then stopped, watching us. The skin, James's skin, lay discarded on the snow behind it like a shed snakeskin. The helicopter appeared over the trees, spotlight scanning the lakeshore. When the beam hit the creature, it convulsed violently, then fled with astonishing speed, flowing across the ice toward the center of the lake. The spotlight followed it, capturing the moment it reached the center and sank, the ice parting like water to admit it. A moment later, the surface was solid again, an innocuous sheet of normal-looking ice. The rest is a blur of rescue operations, medical checks, and endless questions from authorities. We told them everything, but of course they didn't believe us. When we led them to where James's skin had been discarded, it was gone. The patch of black ice never reappeared. The soil samples vanished from our gear. They found our tents the next day, exactly where we'd left them. Both were zipped shut from the inside. One was empty, the one Lisa and I had shared. The other contained James, or rather what was left of him. His body was found in a sleeping bag, perfectly preserved in the cold, without a square inch of skin remaining on his body. The medical examiner's report stated that the skin had been systematically removed with surgical precision, while the victim was still alive. They suspected us, of course. 3 campers return without their friend, telling wild tales of ice creatures, while the friend is found flayed in a tent. We were the only suspects, but there was no evidence linking us to James's death, and eventually, they settled on their own explanation. An unknown assailant had attacked our camp while we were away from the tents. James was killed, and we encountered the killer returning to the scene, prompting our confused, traumatized accounts. No one mentioned the fact that the tent was zipped from the inside. No one could explain how that was possible. Becca moved away immediately after the investigation concluded. I haven't spoken to her since. Lisa and I keep in touch, but neither of us goes camping anymore. Neither of us can stand the cold. Sometimes, on the coldest nights, when my breath fogs in front of my face even indoors, I imagine I see something moving in the condensation. A ripple, a reflection that doesn't match my movements. And I turn up the heat as high as it will go, because I know the truth about what lives in the northern cold. I know why the dean avoids certain places in the deep winter, why Abraham gave us his grandmother's protective talisman, which I lost somewhere on the ice that day. I know that somewhere out there, something is wearing James's skin. And sometimes, I see reports of missing winter hikers, lost campers, solitary ice fishermen who vanished without a trace. And I wonder if it's found new skins to wear. I wonder if it remembers me, and if someday, when the weather turns bitter and the world goes quiet under snow, it will come looking for me, wearing the face of someone I trust. I wonder if I'll recognize it in time, because the tent was zipped shut from the inside, but what we found inside had no skin. And whatever shed that skin is still out there, still hungry, still cold. She was laughing in her sleep, even after we zipped up the body bag. That's when I knew we'd brought something back with us. Something that didn't belong here, that shouldn't exist anywhere. Dr. Mei Lin was dead by all medical standards. No pulse, no respiration, body temperature dropping. Yet her face contorted with silent mirth beneath the heavy-duty black vinyl. A horrible pantomime of joy that made the zipper teeth strain against each other. None of us spoke as the helicopter lifted off from the roof of Mount Sinai Hospital. The thwopping of blades seemed distant, underwater. 3 surviving members of an 8-person expedition, each avoiding the other's eyes. The body bag between us on its gurney twitched occasionally, a finger or toe pressing against the inside like something testing its boundaries. I can write this now because I'm the last one left. Wei hung himself 3 weeks after we returned. Denholm overdosed, deliberately, I'm certain, in his bathtub while listening to Tibetan prayer bowls on high volume. The neighbors complained about the noise before they noticed the smell. You might wonder why I'm still alive. I wonder that myself, especially at 3:17 a.m., which is when I always wake up now, heart hammering against my ribs as if trying to escape. I think it's because I'm the only one who isn't fighting what we brought back. I'm letting it in. The expedition was Denholm's brainchild, archaeology with a side of adventure tourism for the wealthy donors who funded his department. 8 of us in total. Denholm, the silver-haired British archaeologist with more confidence than sense. Wei and Mei Lin, husband and wife geologists from Shanghai University. The Kaufman brothers, tech billionaires looking for an Instagram-worthy vacation. Myself, the expedition doctor, and 2 local guides, Tenzin and Dorj, who lived in the shadow of what the locals called the Breathing Mountain. We were there to document recently discovered cliff burials dating back at least 3,000 years. Climate change had melted away millennia of ice and snow, revealing dozens of small, perfectly square entrances carved into the mountain's face, over 18,000 feet above sea level. The dead are waking up, Tenzin had said the night before our ascent, his weathered face glowing orange in our campfire's light. The mountain breathes them out now. Denholm had laughed, translating for the Kaufmans. Local superstition. They believe the mountain is alive. All mountains are alive, Dorj muttered in perfect English, surprising us. But this one remembers. We should have listened. The base camp was established at 16,000 feet, where the air was already so thin that the Kaufmans needed supplemental oxygen despite our careful acclimatization schedule. Morning brought a sky so intensely blue it seemed solid, like an inverted ocean above us. The mountain loomed, its face scarred with those perfect squares, too perfect, too geometric to be natural, staring down at us like empty eye sockets. I've never seen granite cut so precisely without modern tools, Wei whispered, peering through high-powered binoculars. The edges haven't weathered at all. Because they were covered in ice until recently, Mei Lin replied, but she sounded uncertain. Denholm was practically vibrating with excitement. We'll be the first Western team to document these burial chambers. The journals will be falling over themselves for first publication rights. If we can reach them, I reminded him, checking my medical supplies for the 10th time. The climbing route looks challenging. He waved away my concern. Tenzin and Dorj have set up ropes. The entrances nearest to us are only about 800 feet up from here. Only 800 feet of nearly vertical climbing at oxygen-starved elevation. The Kaufmans exchanged glances but said nothing. They'd paid too much to back out now. That afternoon, we began our preparations, sorting equipment and checking safety gear. The local guides moved with the calm efficiency of men who had been climbing mountains since childhood. but I noticed how they never turned their backs to the cliff face. They kept glancing up at those square black holes, their expressions carefully neutral. Is something wrong? I asked Tenzin as he showed me how to properly secure my harness. The mountain is listening, he replied softly. Can you not feel it? Couldn't then, but I would. The climb began at dawn the next day. The Kaufmans stayed behind at base camp, complaining of headaches, early symptoms of altitude sickness. I should have insisted we all descend, following proper medical protocol. Instead, I left them with oxygen canisters and medication, promising to return by nightfall. The first few hundred feet went smoothly. Denholm led with surprising agility for a man in his 60s, followed by Mei Lin and Wei. Tenzin and Dorj flanked our group, occasionally calling out instructions. I brought up the rear, my doctor's bag strapped securely to my back. We reached the first opening around noon. Up close, the precision of the cutting was even more remarkable. The entrance was exactly 1 meter square, the edges razor sharp. No chisel marks, no sign of human tooling whatsoever. This isn't possible, Wei murmured, running his gloved hand along the opening's edge. It's as if the mountain opened these holes by itself. Don't be ridiculous, Denholm snapped, but his voice lacked conviction. We secured ourselves to the rock face and peered inside. The chamber beyond the opening was surprisingly large, extending deep into the mountain. Our headlamps revealed walls covered in what looked like writing. Not Tibetan, not Chinese, not anything I'd ever seen before. The symbols seemed to move in our peripheral vision, rearranging themselves when we weren't looking directly at them. We need to document everything, Denholm insisted, already unslinging his camera. Tenzin touched his arm. We should not enter. These are not proper burials. What do you mean? I asked. These are not places where the dead were put to rest, Dorj explained. These are places where things were trapped. Denholm scoffed. Superstition. We're scientists, for God's sake. Against the guide's advice, we entered the first chamber. The air inside was different, warmer than it should have been, and strangely humid. It smelled ancient but not stale, more like freshly turned earth than the dusty dryness I'd expected. The chamber was empty except for those undulating symbols on the walls and a shallow depression in the center of the floor, roughly the size and shape of a person lying down.
No artifacts, then all matter, disappointed.
Let's try the next one. We visited 3 more chambers that day. Each was identical, the same impossible cutting, the same living symbols, the same body-shaped depression. No bones, no burial goods, nothing to suggest these spaces had ever been used for their apparent purpose. It was in the 4th chamber that Mei Lin noticed the floor. It's breathing, she said quietly. We fell silent, our headlamps fixed on the depression in the center. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then I saw it. A subtle rise and fall, as if the stone floor was slowly inhaling and exhaling. A trick of the light, Denholm insisted, but he backed toward the entrance. Wei crouched down, placing his palm on the stone. He yanked it back immediately. It's warm, and I felt a pulse. A low vibration began beneath our feet, sending pebbles skittering across the floor. Tenzin and Dorj were already outside, calling for us to hurry. The vibration intensified, becoming a rumble, then a growl. Out, I shouted. Everyone out now. We scrambled through the square opening just as a gust of warm, fetid air blasted out behind us, as if the mountain had violently exhaled. Back on our precarious perch on the cliff face, we stared at each other in shocked silence. Finally, Denholm cleared his throat. A pocket of geothermal activity, clearly, perhaps connected to a magma chamber. That doesn't explain the symbols, Mei Lin said, or these perfect cuts in solid granite. We should return to base camp, Tenzin urged. The sun will set soon. We agreed, shaken by what we'd experienced. As we began our descent, I glanced back at the openings. In the reddening light of the setting sun, they looked like wounds in the mountain's skin, wounds that were slowly, imperceptibly widening. We returned to find base camp in disarray. The Kaufmans' tent was empty, their equipment scattered as if they'd left in a hurry. More disturbing were the footprints, dozens of them, circling the camp, leading nowhere. They were barefoot human prints, despite the freezing temperatures, and they appeared to have walked out from the direction of the mountain, circled our tents several times, then walked back. They went up, George said quietly, pointing to the cliff face. Look! In the gathering darkness, we could just make out two small figures climbing the sheer rock without ropes, without equipment, moving with unnatural speed and precision toward the square openings above. That's impossible, I said. They have no climbing experience, and no one could climb that face freehand. We must go, Tenzin insisted. Now, down the mountain before nightfall. Denholm bristled. We can't abandon them. They're our responsibility. They are gone already, George said flatly. The mountain has them. Wei raised his binoculars, tracking the climbers. His hand began to shake. They're not climbing. They're being pulled. Something is dragging them up the cliff. I grabbed the binoculars. What I saw haunts me still. The Kaufmans weren't climbing. They were splayed against the rock face, arms and legs spread-eagled. They moved upward in jerking, puppet-like motions, their heads lolling back, mouths open in silent screams. And all around them, barely visible in the fading light, were hands, dozens of slender, pale hands extending from the solid rock, pulling them higher.
Jesus Christ, denhou Spirit.
We leave now, Tenzin said, already packing his gear. Or we never leave. We broke camp in minutes, abandoning non-essential equipment. As we prepared to descend, a high, keening wail echoed across the mountainside. Not human, not animal, but something in between. It was answered by another cry, then another, until the air vibrated with them. Don't look back, George warned as we began our descent. Whatever you hear, don't look back. We stumbled down the mountain in the growing darkness, headlamps carving weak cones of light through the swirling snow that had suddenly begun to fall. The wailing continued, sometimes seeming to come from right behind us, sometimes from far above, sometimes terribly from beneath our feet. The chambers are opening, Tenzin panted as we half ran, half slid down a scree slope. All of them. What was in them? I gasped, struggling to keep up. What did we wake up? The old ones, George called back. Those who were here before people. The mountain kept them sleeping. That's not possible, Denholm kept repeating. Not scientifically possible. Science seemed very far away as those cries multiplied, echoing off invisible peaks. The snow fell thicker now, but it wasn't like normal snow. It was too warm, too heavy, sticking to our skin like wet ash. And in the flakes, if you looked closely, I tried not to, were patterns similar to the symbols on the chamber walls. We reached our previous night's campsite around midnight. The plan was to rest briefly, then continue down at first light. None of us spoke about the Kaufmans. None of us spoke at all. As I was setting up the small emergency tent, Mei Lin grabbed my arm. Her eyes were wide, pupils dilated despite the darkness. "Can you hear it?" she whispered. I strained my ears but heard nothing except the wind and our own labored breathing. "The mountain," she insisted. "It's saying my name." Before I could respond, she convulsed, her back arching impossibly. When she relaxed again, her expression had changed. She smiled, a wide, unnatural smile that stretched her face. "They're so beautiful," she whispered. "The things in the walls. I can see them now." Wei rushed to her side, cradling her face. "May, what's wrong?" "Dr. Thompson, help her." I fumbled in my medical kit for a sedative, but before I could administer it, Mei Lin began to laugh. A soft, childlike giggle that froze my blood more thoroughly than the icy wind. "They're coming out now," she said in sing-song. "They've been trapped so long, so hungry." She went limp then, her eyes rolling back. I checked her vitals, rapid pulse, elevated temperature. "Altitude sickness," I said, not believing it myself. "Maybe something in those chambers. Spores, bacteria." "You know better," George said quietly. The night stretched endlessly. We took turns watching Mei Lin, who alternated between unconsciousness and periods of manic alertness, during which she would whisper in a language none of us recognized. Even Tenzin and Dorj couldn't identify it. "Not Tibetan," Tenzin said. "Not any human tongue I know." Around 3:17 a.m., I remember checking my watch. Mei Lin sat bolt upright and screamed, not in fear, but in what sounded horribly like ecstasy. Her arms shot out, fingers spread wide, as if embracing something invisible. "I see you," she breathed. "I've always seen you." Then she collapsed again. This time her pulse was gone. Wei wept as I performed CPR, continuing long after it was clear she wouldn't revive. Denholm stared blankly at the tent wall. Tenzin and Dorj murmured prayers. By dawn, we had wrapped Mei Lin's body in an emergency blanket. We needed to get her down the mountain, both for a proper burial and for medical examination. What had killed her? What had we all been exposed to? As we prepared to descend, Wei suddenly cocked his head, listening. "Do you hear that?" he asked. I was about to say no when it reached my ears. A faint, muffled sound coming from Mei Lin's wrapped body. A giggle. We all froze. The sound came again, unmistakable now. Laughter. "It's trapped air escaping the lungs," I said automatically. "A known phenomenon after death." Wei stepped forward and slowly peeled back the blanket from his wife's face. Her eyes were open, staring fixedly at nothing. Her lips were blue, but as we watched, those lips curved into a smile, and she laughed again. The helicopter evacuation was arranged from the nearest village, 2 days' descent from where Mei Lin died. She laughed intermittently throughout those 2 days, her dead body twitching and shifting in ways that defied medical explanation. Eventually, we put her in a body bag from our emergency supplies, hoping it would somehow contain whatever was happening to her. It didn't stop the laughter. Denholm had a complete breakdown on the second day. He kept insisting he could see things moving under the snow, long, sinuous shapes following our path down the mountain. "They're coming with us," he repeated, his academic composure shattered. "We've let them out, and they're coming with us." He wasn't wrong. When the helicopter finally arrived at the village, the pilot refused to take Mei Lin's body at first. He crossed himself repeatedly, backing away. "What's wrong with her?" he asked in halting English. "Why does she move?" We convinced him eventually, using money and lies. "Altitude sickness," we said. "Muscle spasms after death. Nothing supernatural. Nothing to fear." She was laughing in her sleep, even after we zipped up the body bag. The medical examiner in New York found nothing unusual in Mei Lin's autopsy. Official cause of death was recorded as acute mountain sickness complicated by pulmonary edema. The fact that she continued to laugh and smile for hours after clinical death was absent from the report. The fact that the medical examiner killed himself 2 days later was deemed unrelated. Denholm lasted barely a month. Wei made it 3 weeks. The Kaufmans were never found, despite an expensive search operation funded by their company. Tenzin and Dorj disappeared back into the mountains, carrying warnings to other villages. "Stay away from the breathing mountain." And me? I haven't slept properly since we returned. I wake at 3:17 a.m. every morning, feeling the pressure of invisible hands on my face. I've lost my medical practice, my marriage, my grip on what I once thought was reality. Because they followed us home, you see. The things from the chambers. I can see them now, in the corner of my vision. Tall, slender figures with too many joints. Their bodies shifting and flowing like the symbols on those ancient walls. They're patient. They've waited thousands of years. They can wait a little longer to fully emerge into our world. Sometimes I find strange symbols drawn on my bathroom mirror after I shower. Symbols I don't remember making, identical to those in the chambers. My dreams are filled with that cliff face. Those perfect square holes opening wider, wider. Things crawling out like insects from a disturbed hive. The mountain breathes them out now. I've tried to warn people. I've contacted other researchers, government agencies, news outlets. No one believes me. Why would they? Sounds insane. I'd have thought the same before. 2 days ago, I saw the headline, "Unusual weather phenomenon. Warm snow reported across eastern United States." The article described ash-like flakes that melt into patterns on the skin. They're spreading. Yesterday, I woke to find my hands covered in dirt, my fingernails torn and bloody. On my kitchen table was a perfect square hole cut into the wood. 1 foot by 1 foot, edges impossibly clean. I don't remember making it. Beneath it, the floor seems to rise and fall, ever so slightly, as if breathing. I know what's happening now. I understand what those chambers were, not tombs but doors, not burials but prisons, and we unlocked them. Tonight, I won't fight when the pale hands reach for me from the shadows. I won't scream when they pull me through spaces too small for a human body. I'll go willingly, because resistance only makes it worse. Ask Wei, ask Denholm, ask the Kaufmans if you can find what's left of them. One last warning, though it's probably too late. If you hear laughter coming from somewhere it shouldn't, from the walls, from beneath your feet, from the body of someone who has died, run. Don't look back. Don't try to understand. And whatever you do, don't smile back. Once you start, you'll never stop, even after they zip up your body bag. The lake was full of hands, all just beneath the surface, reaching up but never breaking through. I wish I could tell you that was a hallucination or some poetic way of describing ripples on water. But I can't, because what I saw that summer in Finland was real as the lingering cold that's settled into my bones since. As real as the nightmares that wake me at 3 in the morning, sweat-soaked and trembling, convinced that something wet and ancient is sliding across my bedroom floor. It's been 16 months. The therapist says I'm making progress. The meds help me sleep. But I know what I saw, what we all saw before the others. No, I should start properly. From the beginning. My name is Daniel Keene. I'm an environmental researcher specializing in wetland ecosystems, which is how I ended up on that University of Helsinki expedition. 6 of us altogether, a mix of academics and grad students, trekking through the remote forests of eastern Finland to catalog biodiversity changes in isolated lake systems. We'd been backpacking for 3 days, moving deeper into the boreal forest than any of us had gone before. Cell service had disappeared on day 1. By day 3, we were following coordinates on GPS devices and hand-drawn notes from a local guide who declined to join us. This area, Dr. Sarikoski had explained during our orientation, her fingers circling a blank patch on the map, contains several unnamed lakes that haven't been properly surveyed since the Soviet era, perfect for baseline climate impact studies. What she didn't mention was why these lakes remained unsurveyed, despite Finland's meticulous environmental record-keeping. None of us thought to ask. We made camp on the shore of our 3rd lake just as dusk was settling. This one wasn't on any of our maps, but the GPS coordinates matched where we were supposed to be. A perfect oval of black water, maybe half a kilometer across, nestled in a depression surrounded by ancient pines. The trees around it stood unnaturally straight, like sentinels. No undergrowth, just a carpet of copper-colored needles that muffled our footsteps. "Strange place," muttered Elias, our equipment tech, as he helped me set up the soil sampling station. Too quiet. He was right. No frogs croaking, no insects buzzing, no birds calling out their evening songs. Just the occasional sigh of wind through the pines. Maybe it's too cold for the usual wildlife, I suggested, though it was June and the temperature was mild. Or acidity levels are off. Mikko, our Finnish grad student, overheard us. He was crouched by the shore, filling sample containers with lake water. "The locals call this area Kuolman Sili," he said without looking up. "The embrace of death." Elias rolled his eyes. "Very dramatic. You Finns and your morbid place names." Mikko shrugged. "Just telling you what my grandmother called it. She grew up in a village about 60 kilometers south of here. Said people avoided these woods." "Why?" I asked, suddenly curious. "Old stories. People who came here didn't come back. Or they came back wrong." Dr. Sarikoski approached, clipboard in hand. "Are we telling ghost stories already? Save it for the campfire, Mikko. We need to finish setting up before dark." As the others dispersed, I knelt by the lake's edge. The water was still as glass, reflecting the dimming sky perfectly. No ripples, no movement. Despite the lack of wind, I felt a chill run through me, as if someone had walked over my grave. I reached down to test the temperature, but stopped just before my fingers touched the surface. Something about the water's perfect stillness made me hesitate. Instead, I took out a temperature probe from my kit and dipped it in. The digital readout blinked, 4.3 degrees Celsius, nearly freezing. Strange for this time of year even in Finland. That night around the fire, the mood was subdued. We'd finished setting up our equipment, water quality monitors, soil sample stations, wildlife cameras, but everyone seemed on edge. The silence of the forest pressed in around us, broken only by the crackling of flames. "This lake isn't on any of our maps," Dr. Sarkoski finally said, reviewing her tablet. "We should name it for our records." "How about Lake Creepy?" Elias suggested, only half joking. "It must have a local name," said Jana, our botanist. "Miko, did your grandmother ever mention what they called this specific lake?" Miko was staring into the flames, his expression distant. "Orion Lampy," he said quietly. "That's what she would have called it." "What does that mean?" I asked. "Sacrifice pond." A log shifted in the fire, sending sparks spiraling into the darkness. No one spoke for a long moment. "Charming," Dr. Sarkoski finally said, breaking the tension. "Let's stick with the coordinates for now. Everyone should get some sleep. Tomorrow we start work at dawn." We retreated to our tents, pitched in a semicircle facing away from the lake. I lay awake for hours, listening to the unnatural silence. Eventually, I drifted into a troubled sleep. I dreamed of hands, dozens of them, pale and slender, reaching up through black water. Not grasping or grabbing, just reaching, fingers spread wide, as if feeling for something they'd lost. In the dream, I knelt at the lake's edge, watching them. They sensed me somehow. One by one, they turned in my direction, fingers curling slightly, inviting. I woke gasping, my sleeping bag damp with sweat. The inside of my tent was bathed in the gray light of early morning. Checking my watch, 4:17 a.m. Still too early, but I knew I wouldn't fall back asleep. I dressed quietly and unzipped my tent. The campsite was silent, everyone else still asleep. The lake stretched before me, its surface glassy and still in the pre-dawn light. Mist hovered just above the water, thick enough that I couldn't see the opposite shore. Without fully deciding to, I walked toward the water's edge. The morning air felt dense, pressing against my skin like a physical thing. The mist parted around me as I approached, then closed behind me. 20 paces from shore, and I could no longer see the camp. Just me and the black water. I don't know what made me kneel down. Scientific curiosity, maybe, or the remnants of my dream still clinging to my consciousness. I leaned forward, trying to see through the perfect mirror of the lake's surface. That's when I saw it. Pale shape, just beneath the water. Long and slender. 5 appendages spread wide. A hand. I jerked backward, heart hammering in my chest. Couldn't be. A trick of light. A submerged branch. My imagination running wild after that dream. I forced myself to look again. The hand was still there, and now I could see others. Dozens of them, suspended just below the surface, palms up, fingers slightly curled. Not moving, but somehow not quite still either. As I watched, one seemed to drift slightly higher, reaching toward where my face hovered above the water. I scrambled away from the shore, my breath coming in ragged gasps. This wasn't possible. Had to be some kind of bizarre algae formation, or an arrangement of stones on the lake bed creating an optical illusion. There had to be a rational explanation. "Daniel!" Dr. Sarkoski's voice cut through my panic. She was standing by the camp, watching me with concern. "Everything all right?" I glanced back at the lake. The mist had thickened. I could no longer see the water clearly. "Fine," I managed, my voice steadier than I felt. "Just taking some preliminary observations." She nodded, but her expression remained skeptical. Well, since you're up, help me get breakfast started. We've got a long day ahead. By mid-morning, I had almost convinced myself I'd imagined the whole thing. The sun had risen, burning away the mist, and the lake looked perfectly ordinary. Our team spread out around its perimeter, taking samples and setting up equipment. I kept my back to the water as much as possible, focusing on soil collection. Elias came up beside me around noon. "Found something weird," he said, handing me his tablet. On the screen was an image from the submersible camera he'd sent into the lake earlier. The photo showed the lake bed dark, muddy, ordinary, except for a series of vertical stakes or poles arranged in a perfect circle. They looked ancient, worn down by water and time. "What do you think?" he asked. "Old fishing structure? Remnants of a dock?" I zoomed in on the image. The stakes weren't wood. They were too pale, too smooth, and they weren't uniform in thickness, thicker at one end, tapering to the other. "I'm not sure," I said slowly. "How deep was this?" "About 15 meters, near the center of the lake." "Did you show Dr. Sarikoski?" He shook his head. "Wanted your opinion first. She's been tense all morning." I handed the tablet back. "We should document it properly. Could be archaeologically significant." As Elias walked away, I rubbed my eyes. Those weren't stakes. They looked like bones. Human leg bones, driven into the mud in a perfect circle. That evening, Miko didn't join us for dinner. Jana found him sitting on a boulder at the lake's edge, staring out over the water. "He says he's not feeling well," she reported back. "Wants to be left alone." Dr. Sarikoski frowned. "We can't have anyone getting sick out here. We're at least 2 days' hike from the nearest road." "I don't think it's physical," Jana said quietly. "He's been different since we arrived here, withdrawn." "I'll talk to him," I offered, setting down my plate. Miko didn't acknowledge me as I approached. His gaze was fixed on the center of the lake, where the water was darkest. "Not hungry?" I asked, sitting beside him. He didn't respond immediately. When he finally spoke, his voice was flat. "My grandmother wasn't a superstitious woman. She was a teacher, believed in science, education. But she warned me about this place." "What did she say exactly?" "That the old gods still lived in these waters. That the villagers used to feed them, especially in hard winters." He turned to look at me, his eyes hollow. "Do you know what they fed them, Daniel?" I shook my head. "People. Usually strangers, travelers passing through. But in the famine years, they drew lots among themselves." "Miko, those are just old stories." "I dream about them," he interrupted. "Every time I close my eyes, hands reaching up from the water, waiting." He looked back at the lake. "They're still waiting, Daniel." A chill ran down my spine that had nothing to do with the evening temperature. I remembered my own dream, the pale hands beneath the surface. "You should eat something," I said finally. "Get some rest." He didn't respond, just kept staring at the water. Back at the campfire, I didn't mention my conversation with Miko. Instead, I asked Dr. Sarikoski about our preliminary findings. "The ecosystem here is unusual," she admitted. "Water temperature is colder than it should be. No fish that we can detect. No amphibians. Virtually no insect life in or around the lake." "A dead lake," I suggested. She shook her head. "Not dead, just empty. The water quality is pristine. Perfect conditions for life. But it's as if nothing wants to live here." That night, the dreams came again. The hands beneath the water, reaching up. But this time, they weren't alone. I could see faces too, pale ovals hovering below the hands. Eyes closed, mouths open in silent screams or silent hunger. I couldn't tell which. I woke to the sound of movement outside my tent. Checking my watch. 2:43 a.m. I unzipped the tent flap and peered out. A figure was walking slowly toward the lake. Even in the dim moonlight, I recognized Miko's lanky frame. "Miko?" I called softly, not wanting to wake the others. He didn't respond, continuing his steady pace toward the water. Cursing under my breath, I pulled on my boots and followed him. The night air was bitter cold, my breath clouding before me. Miko had reached the shore by the time I caught up to him. "Hey!" I said, grabbing his arm. "What are you doing?" He turned to look at me, and I recoiled. His eyes were open but vacant, unfocused. Was he sleepwalking? "They're calling me," he said, his voice dreamlike. "Can't you hear them?" "There's nothing calling, Miko. You're dreaming." I tugged his arm. "Come back to camp." He resisted, stronger than I expected. "They're so hungry, so patient." He turned back toward the lake. "They've waited so long." The water at the edge of the lake began to ripple, though there was no wind. Something was disturbing it from below. "We need to go," I said, real fear flooding through me. "Right now." Miko smiled faintly. "It's okay. They just want one. To welcome us. A sacrifice to ensure safe passage." The ripples grew stronger. The black water churned, and beneath its surface, I could see them clearly now. Hands, dozens of them, pale fingers spreading wide, reaching upward. They were no longer just beneath the surface. They were rising. I pulled harder on Miko's arm, dragging him backward. "We're leaving. Now." He struggled against me, surprisingly strong. "They'll just come for someone else if I don't go. That's how it works. One tribute, freely given." The first hand broke the surface of the water. Pale, skeletal fingers dripping black liquid that wasn't quite water. Then another, and another, breaking through like hideous water lilies. I abandoned all pretense of calm, wrapping my arms around Miko's waist and bodily hauling him away from the shore. He fought me, scratching, elbowing, trying to break free. "Let me go!" he screamed, his voice shrill with panic or ecstasy. I couldn't tell which. "They're choosing me. It's an honor." I didn't waste breath arguing. I dragged him backward, every muscle straining, putting distance between us and those horrible reaching hands. They were fully surfaced now, rising higher, attached to arms that stretched impossibly up from the depths. Some were skeletal, bare bone gleaming in the moonlight. Others were more recently dead, flesh hanging in tatters. And behind me the camp was stirring. Flashlight beams cut through the darkness. "What's happening?" Dr. Sarikoski's voice. "Daniel? Miko? Stay back," I shouted. "Stay away from the water." Too late, I realized my mistake. In the moment I turned to warn the others, Miko wrenched free from my grasp. He sprinted toward the lake, arms outstretched, a sound halfway between a laugh and a sob escaping his throat. "No!" I lunged after him, fingers brushing the back of his jacket but failing to grasp it. Miko hit the water at a run. One step, 2 steps into the shallows, and then the hands had him. They rose up around him like a grotesque forest, fingers latching onto his clothes, his limbs, his hair. He didn't scream. He smiled, a look of transcendent peace crossing his features as they pulled him down. The water closed over him with barely a ripple. Behind me, chaos erupted. Screams, shouts, the frantic beam of flashlights sweeping over the now-still surface of the lake. What happened? "Where's Miko?" Jana was beside me, her face pale in the moonlight. I couldn't speak, couldn't explain what I'd just seen. The hands had retreated beneath the surface, taking Miko with them. The lake was a perfect mirror once more, reflecting the stars above. Dr. Sarikoski took charge, organizing a search along the shoreline, convinced that Miko had fallen in and might still be rescued. I knew better but couldn't find the words to explain. They would think I was insane. By dawn, the search had turned hopeless. No sign of Miko. The lake had swallowed him completely. "We need to hike out," Dr. Sarikoski said, her voice hollow. "Get emergency services back here with proper equipment." No one argued. We packed in silence, each lost in our own thoughts. I caught Elias looking at his tablet, reviewing the images of the bone circle at the bottom of the lake, his face ashen. As we shouldered our packs, ready to leave this cursed place behind, I took one last look at the lake. Perfect stillness. No sign of the horror that lurked beneath. But as I watched, a single ripple appeared in the center, spreading outward in a gentle circle. And just for a moment, I thought I saw a hand rise slightly, fingers spread in what might have been a wave goodbye. We hiked out in a single day, pushing ourselves to the limit of endurance. No one wanted to spend another night in those woods. When we finally reached cell service, Dr. Sarikoski called the authorities, reporting Miko's disappearance as a drowning accident. The search and rescue team found nothing, of course. They dragged the lake for 2 days. No body. Their sonar showed a perfectly normal lake bed. No circle of bones. No evidence of anything unusual. Elias's photos had somehow corrupted on his device, showing nothing but black frames. They concluded that Miko's body must have been caught in an underwater cavity or swept away by some hidden current. The case was eventually classified as an accidental drowning. The university suspended our research project. Out of respect, they said, but I knew the truth. Dr. Sarikoski had filed a report recommending that the lake remain unstudied, that it be left alone. The others have moved on. New projects, new research sites. We don't talk about what happened. Don't acknowledge the impossible thing we witnessed. But I know they remember. I see it in their eyes when we occasionally cross paths at conferences. That haunted look, that silent understanding. As for me, I left field research behind. Took a teaching position. Safe, predictable work surrounded by people and concrete and electric light. I tell myself it's a natural career progression. But I know the truth. I can't stop thinking about those hands. About Miko's face as they took him, that look of peace. About what might be lurking in other remote lakes. In the dark places of the world where old gods still hunger. I dream about them still. The hands beneath the water, waiting patiently through the long centuries. And lately, there's a new hand among them. Familiar, reaching up with the others. Sometimes I wonder if I should have let Miko go willingly. If his willing sacrifice was meant to protect the rest of us. Because ever since that night, I felt it. A pull, a subtle call drawing me northward, back to Finland, back to Lake Lampi. And sometimes, when I wash my hands or step into the shower, I swear I see pale fingers rising from the drain, reaching for me. They're patient. They can wait. But sooner or later, I know I'll have to go back. The lake is full of hands, and one of them is calling my name.